Well, Ben, if you want to go ahead and move us forward, I have asked Ben Riley, who has joined us here, to kind of navigate the screen so that I don't touch any buttons that would prove dangerous. So he has agreed to do that. But I want to first, I want to welcome everyone. Good morning. A very early good morning to our friends on the West Coast. You may still be having that first cup of coffee, but we thank you all for joining us today, and Happy New Year, as this is the first time we have met in 2024. So I want to welcome everyone to the Kentucky Department of Education's Technical Advisory Committee, or KTAC. I'm Kevin O'Hare, an Academic Program Manager in the Office of Assessment and Accountability. We have a lot of quality information to share today and tomorrow, so much that we've had to break this up into a two-day event. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We are always happy to be able to have these discussions and look through this all the different details and the information we're going to share, and always get some wonderful guidance and expertise from our advisory members. So before we start, though, I want to give just a brief bit of background on the development of this advisory committee. Kentucky Revised Statute of KRS 158.6455 was amended in 2021 and required Kentucky to form its own technical advisory committee. We definitely appreciate the expertise and the experience of our 5 members of Kentucky's TAC, and we'll meet them in just a few moments. With me today on Teams are colleagues of mine in the Office of Assessment and Accountability to provide support for the meeting over the next couple of days. We're also joined by vendor partners with Kentucky's Work. You'll meet several of those individuals throughout the 2-day agenda. So we'll actually, as folks come on to host, we'll ask them to provide their name and their role and before they jump into the presentation. Before I hand the meeting over to our facilitator, Brian Gong with the Center for Assessment, to introduce the KTAC members and review the agenda, I want to remind us of a few key expectations for conducting these virtual meetings. The meeting must comply with the requirements of the Open Meetings Act accordingly. KTAC members must ensure their video is streaming and they can be seen throughout the duration of the meeting. If we're in session, it does require that everyone has their camera on. We do ask committee members to please mute your microphone when not talking. However, all discussions must be broadcast to the public. Therefore, be sure your microphone is not on mute when you speak. Every time you speak during the meeting, please unmute your mic, state your name, and take just a short pause, as this will give the software time to recognize you. Technology can be lovely at times, and when it works, it's great. When it don't, definitely causes chain reaction. So one last thing is to silence or turn off other electronic devices that may cause disruption to your sound feed. So again, minutes will be taken and shared with the general public on the KD website once they've been made available. In addition, KRS 158.6455 requires the department submit reports regarding the advice and recommendations of the committee to the Office of Education Accountability by July 1st and December 1st of each year. With that being said, now I'm going to hand things over to Brian for KTAC introductions and review of today's agenda. And again, a huge thank you to everyone for joining us today. So Brian, this is where I'm going to hand things over to you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm Brian Gong with the Center for Assessment, and I'm serving as the facilitator for the Kentucky Technical Advisory Committee. We'd like to go ahead and ask the KTAC members who have joined us to introduce themselves. Before you do that, I'd like to note that Elena Diaz-Bielo, who is a member of the KTAC, is not able to join us today. She sends her regrets, but also her welcome. She'll be joining us tomorrow. If we could ask Corinne if you'd go first, and then Pete, Phoebe, and Suzanne, if go ahead and briefly introduce yourselves.
Hi, thank you. I'm Corinne Huggins-Manley, Associate Professor at the University of Florida.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Pete Goldschmidt. I'm faculty at California State University, Northridge.
Hi, I'm Phoebe Winter. I'm an independent consultant in measurement and research in Richmond, Virginia.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Suzanne Lane. I have recently retired as professor at the University of Pittsburgh.
Thank you. Kevin was recounting the history of KTAC, and Suzanne, you may have the longest history of providing technical advice and support to Kentucky. It goes back many years. You have maybe you want to could mention it's really almost to the beginning of the Kentucky assessment and accountability programs.
That's right, Brian. This is Suzanne Lane. That was many years ago. I believe at that point, Bob Lynn was on the TAC, if I remember correctly, and of course, other stellar colleagues. And Brian, you were at Kentucky at that point.
Yeah,
So it's nice to be back.
It really shows how long Kentucky's been working on their programs. Thank you. And Kevin, if there's an appropriate time, we'll ask the KDE staff and the vendors and the others who are participating in the presentations to introduce themselves. But since some of the vendors and staff are only joining for their agenda items, we'll ask them to do the introductions at that point rather than now, because some of them said if we came for introductions at the beginning, it might be 2 or 3 hours before they actually had to do their agenda item.
Yeah.
The agenda, everyone should have the agenda. We will have a brief review of the agenda, and I'll ask for any amendments or approval of the short public minutes that were generated for the June 13th meeting. Then we'll have an update from the Kentucky Department of Education. I think Kevin and colleagues are going to be doing that. They'll provide important context and some of the background of the assessment and accountability programs for the KTAC information. Then we're going to have a presentation and discussion about remote test or virtual testing and security presented by two or a couple of people from Cavion, who is the security contractor for Kentucky. We'll have a break, and then our last major agenda item will be a presentation and leading discussion about the large project that the Kentucky Department of Education is doing with a number of partners on developing alternate assessment and accountability models under the umbrella of the Kentucky United We Learn Council project. And that will be led by Karen Dodd, who's a staff member at KTE, as well as a member of the Kentucky United We Learn Council, Penny Christian. We'll end by hopefully setting future meeting dates for the next calendar year, and then we'll adjourn no later than 4 o'clock. We can adjourn earlier than that if we move through our items, and we don't need as much time, but we won't be later than that. Any suggestions or amendments or questions about the agenda? Okay. I think that the KTAC members received the draft minutes earlier. Are there any suggestions for or corrections or modifications for them?
Not for me.
If not, do we have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve. Oh, sorry.
Okay, Pete, you move. I'll second.
There you go.
Okay, Pete moves
Give
a
it to
second.
Speedy.
Those,
Yeah.
any discussion? If not, those in favor, if you could say aye.
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 Okay, thank you. As Kevin mentioned, there are public minutes that are posted to the KDE website along with each meeting, and those are draft for the meeting until they get approved at the next meeting. So we'll have meetings from this meeting up in within a week or so, and then and you'll see those before they go up, and then we'll need to approve them again at the next meeting. Kevin, I think we're ready for the next agenda item, which is the update from the department.
All right, Brian. Well, thank you so much, and we definitely appreciate the opportunity to share a few updates from the department, and specifically, and then some additional information around kind of what's going on with the Office of Assessment and Accountability. So, if we can move to the next slide, please. So I think Jennifer Stafford is on, and well, I know she is. I talked to her just a few moments ago, so she is going to jump on here and just give us a little background on some of the KDE staff and organization updates. So Jennifer, I'll turn that over to you.
Thanks, Kevin, and good morning, everyone. Thank you again for being here with us and this two-day event for our Kentucky Technical Advisory Program. We wanted to start out this morning with just some updates that's happening at the Kentucky Department of Education. The first of which is we have a new interim commissioner. The previous commissioner, Dr. Jason Glass, exited Kentucky Department of Education effective October 1st of 2023 to move on to other opportunities that he is pursuing. And since then, we have, as a department, the Board of Education hired an associate commissioner, Robin Kinney, as our interim commissioner. Robin comes from KDE on a couple of different occasions. She worked previously in KDE, and then she is now back. Most recently, she has been the associate commissioner in the finance and operations office. She has been with the department for many years and is transitioning to that role of interim commissioner. Since she has been in the role, since October, she's done a lot to make connections with KDE staff across the department that she didn't get to always work with in her role there in finance, but she's gotten to meet a lot of new KDE staff. She's also been visiting schools and districts and getting to know the schools and the exciting, innovative practices that are happening there. She's also made a concerted effort to connect with education stakeholders across the state, including the legislator. The General Assembly is in session right now as we speak. It's a long session this year, and she's done a really good job of reaching out and connecting with legislators. As far as a search for a new commissioner, we have hired, or the Board of Education released an RFP for a national firm and to do a national search, I should say. And we've hired someone, a company that is actually now searching for a new commissioner, and that firm it has provided information on Kentucky Department of Education's website for both applicants as well as a survey for education stakeholders and people that are interested in education at the Commonwealth to provide feedback on the type of qualifications and characteristics of a new commissioner. So that survey is currently out for people to respond to. The goal is to have a commissioner on board by the in 2024. In the legislative session, I want to say in 2023, the Senate filed and passed a bill that the Commissioner of Education must be confirmed by the Senate. So any candidate that the Kentucky Board of Education offers the position to or tries to hire must be confirmed by the Senate. So that does impact the time frame of which to hire a new commissioner. As I mentioned, the General Assembly is in session currently, and their session ends in April. So there is short time frame here to search for a new commissioner and interview, and then that confirmation. So the goal is to complete that interview process, the application process, and for the Senate or the candidate to go in front of the Senate for confirmation during this legislative session. So we're hoping that all works so that a new commissioner can be on board in the June, July timeframe here this summer of 2024. So let me pause there and see if there are any questions from our KTAC members about the interim or the search for a new commissioner of the education in Kentucky.
Jennifer, this is Brian Gong. Are there, often commissioners have particular programs that they are sponsoring or championing, and I think Dr. Glass was doing that. Are there any things that you think might change for the Office of Assessment and Accountability, or assessment or accountability efforts within the Commonwealth?
Sure, Brian. Thanks for the question. Dr. Glass did a listening tour across Kentucky when he was first hired, and he was hired during the pandemic, and he did a listening tour and heard from our education stakeholders that they would like to see changes in the assessment or the accountability system. At that, there were several iterations that have led to the Kentucky United We Learn Council and the initiative there. You're going to hear more about that from Karen Dodd and Penny Christian this afternoon. But the work of the Kentucky United We Learn Council continues under interim commissioner Kenny. She is committed to hearing from our stakeholders, to giving voice to our education leaders, parents, those people who are interested in Kentucky education and would like to see the advancement of Kentucky and the outcomes for our students. So the Kentucky United We Learn Council continues and will continue the good work of looking at vibrant learning experiences, accelerating innovation, and then looking at policies that could change or would need to change both at the state and federal level if proposals are made and that could be adopted. So there are different types of activities and discussions, a lot of learning that's taking place right now across the committees to see what other states are doing, what's been federally approved and what's not been approved, and how that Kentucky could push on those, looking at different waivers and different approaches to assessment and accountability. So the Commonwealth were not afraid to suggest or to push things forward and make changes for the betterment of our students. So I do see the Kentucky United We Learn Council in that initiative moving forward as we move into and through Commissioner Kinney's tenure, and then the transition toward a new commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then there's always chances that the General Assembly will file new legislation for assessment or accountability. Kentucky, we've seen changes, legislative changes annually since 2016. So the chances that there will be changes to accountability are good. Any other comments? Thank you, Brian, for that. Okay, and if not, I will pass it to my friend and colleague, Kevin Hill.
Hello, good morning, everyone. You should have received in your packet in your materials for the meeting school report card briefing packet, which is document 2. So I'm going to kind of go over that. We just had the release last fall in October 31st. I'll kind of give you just some high level summary of that, and the briefing packet kind of covers the contents of that release that's prepared for the media. Then we build, all that goes into our school report card. So the focus of the briefing packet is about assessment accountability, but the school report card covers even more additional data with a kind of a safety pieces, attendance, etc., finance data. So the briefing packet, like I said, provided that summary. We released it on October 31st. The focus of the briefing packet is about accountability. So the accountability system this year was our first full year of implementation for 23, with both status and change. I know we've talked about this before, but with those performance ratings for schools, district, and the state, basically went from the lowest level of red up to the highest level of blue for colors. So status in the system is based on the current year, while change is change compared to the prior year. So then status and change are combined together for each indicator. And we also have put together an overall score that is used for federal identification for the bottom 5%. So all that comes together, and it's reported publicly in the school report card. As I said, that was put out on Halloween, which was interesting timing this year, but it's the way it worked out. As far as the briefing packet, the focus of the briefing packet, as I said, it's started the first few pages is about the accountability system and summary of the ratings of the schools. And as I said, those start at the lowest level is red up to orange, yellow, green, and blue. So there's a lot of tables in that briefing packet on the performance of schools by level. Remember, our system in Kentucky is level based with ratings by elementary, middle, and high separately. So if a school is combined as a like a K-8 school or a K-12 school. They have ratings for each level of their school. So that's part of our plan. So then there's data for each indicator. We have reading and math indicator. We have a science, social studies, and writing indicator, ELP indicator for English learners. Then there's quality of school climate and safety, post-secondary readiness, and graduation rate at high school. So then as it goes through the tables throughout the briefing packet, there are data focused on status and change and the ratings that came out of that. So back in September, we had a standard setting with the Center for Assessment help guide us through that with a group of educators and leaders in Kentucky that set those cut scores, et cetera. So this provides our first full summary of the results. So that's this kind of the state system. Then leading into like page 25 and 6, there's a summary of the federal classifications. And in 23, there were 28 CSI schools, 224 TSI schools, and no ATSI schools. So basically, there were 23 schools previously identified as CSI that exited, and 185 schools previously identified as TSI exited. So schools in Kentucky are identified every 3 years for CSI and ATSI, while TSI is annually. The next identification will be 2025 for CSI and ATSI. As we get down into the rest of the briefing packet, it starts going into assessment details for the Kentucky Summative Assessment. And this year was 23 was the second year of the results we can compare back. So that let us kind of see summary results on the assessment itself. Those, the coming out of the pandemic, we saw increases in the PD percentages, proficient and distinguished, most all content areas, elementary and middle, and increases at social studies and writing at high school. At their concern areas are reading, math, or math and science. Excuse me. Oh, excuse me a second. Basically, math and science are seeing concerns. Oh, excuse me. As we get toward the end of the briefing packet, it's focused on graduation rate. Excuse me a second.
As Kevin has to jump off there for just a moment. Again, kind of going back to where he left off there. We do have to our big target areas has kind of been at this point science and math. Not to say that we're not fully focused on all our content areas and showing improvement. We have the past few years has been critical years. We've encountered a lot of first, if you will, even for our students and those across the Commonwealth. So looks like he may be back with us.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm back dealing with sinus issues today, so appreciate that. Yeah, that's been a concern with math and science especially, and we're seeing especially low rates at middle school and high school, especially high school with the math rates in the low 30% range, and science in the 10% range proficient. So, and we continue to see persistent gaps among students with disabilities and English learners and African American students across all content areas. As I said, next we get into graduation rates, and the graduation rates have been in the 90s over recent years. We saw a little dip during the pandemic time, but it's still up above 90, and rates improved in 23 for most all groups. At the end of the briefing packet, there's a table, Appendix A, that has tables on the cut scores that were came out of the standard setting group, along with the bottom 5% cut scores as well. As for Appendix B, it's focused on the ACT. We give the ACT to all juniors in Kentucky, and that composite score is up in 23 to 18.5, but it's still below where the composite was prior to the pandemic, which was at 19.0. So we're seeing improvement at high school and ACT, but still not where we were prior to the pandemic. Then the Appendix C covers, we also have a kindergarten readiness assessment, and those trends showed improvement up to 46% ready, but we're still below where we were prior to the pandemic, around 51%. So that's kind of the high level of the components of the briefing packet, and be glad to take any questions just about the contents and things you might have noticed, or any questions.
Suzanne?
Hi, this is Suzanne Lane. I had a couple of questions. One, I was wondering how the new accountability system, especially with including change, was received by school and district personnel. And the other one is, I thank you for the report. First of all, it was very thorough. Are there any initiatives across the state to try to help schools who are struggling within mathematics and science? Is there a statewide effort across to help improve instruction or support instruction? Thank you.
So Kevin, I can.
Yeah, I'll let you take it. Sure.
Sure. What we do in our division is we communicate and train on both the assessment and the accountability system. And I would say that this has been a very smooth transition for such a big change. There, including that change element, was a lot different than what we had done ever in the past in state accountability. We had always, in our history, reported on status. We didn't really call it status, we just called it current year data. And with Senate Bill 158 in 2020, that was passed in 2020, it had those terms of status, which meant current year, and change, difference in the prior year. It's taken us this long to get to the point that we had 2 years of data in order to report the change. So we've been talking about it for multiple years, and we had done a lot of training as far as saying that it's coming, this is what what we're anticipating, this is what it will be. And then when we got down to the calculation of putting change together into the accountability system, it was a very simplistic calculation, which I think really helped in the communication and the acceptance of the difference of accepting the change into that. The calculation was something that people could do on a calculator or just a 4-function calculator, and they were able to understand the calculation and be able to calculate it themselves. So to have such a complex system that we put in place this year, the transition to that system was very smooth. Kevin mentioned we had the standard setting meeting we had a couple during the fall, and prior to that standard setting meetings, we had spoken and presented to our LSAC. It's the Local Superintendent Advisory Council. We had gone to them multiple times about guidance and their policy perspectives to get their input. Another step that we took that was a positive step is we brought together thought partners that were education leaders that really understood the accountability system and presented to them, asked their feedback, and we got questions from our thought partners that when we got the questions to the field, we were prepared for. So it was a smooth transition overall. Now, there were areas that people just disagreed with within the legislation itself. So that was something that we could explain, and we could point back to whatever the policy was or whatever the statute or the regulation was that they were disagreeing with. So for that, it was quite smooth. Your second question was about the.
Excuse me, this is Suzanne. Can I just follow up?
Yeah.
Did you, in terms of the federal categories, did you notice a lot of changes in what schools were classified once you included the change in the accountability?
I don't think that there was a lot of change to the identification. There was some exiting and entering into the system, but I wouldn't say that there was a lot. Kevin, would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the groups, if you're talking about specific groups of identification, still similar. I mean, we exited a lot of schools, but as far as the groups identified are still, traditionally low performing groups like students with disabilities, English learners, et cetera.
And your second question was about math programs. The Office of Teaching and Learning has programs that they are supporting content and pedagogy in the classrooms. They've got a lot of development, particularly around reading and writing. Math and science are the areas that they are developing programs for. And so they're not as far along in the progression of the programs as they are the reading and the writing, but they are on the horizon and working toward that. I see other hands up. No, thank you for the question. I see other hands up. Brian, I'm not sure who was first on the hands up.
I think Phoebe.
I think, Phoebe, and then Pete, and then Corinne.
Yeah.
Phoebe?
Yeah, this is Phoebe Winter. I noticed in the charts, and I think this is around, of course, the page zipped off where it was, but oh, there we go. For English learner progress level, there are far fewer schools who have English learners in them than don't, apparently, because there's for example, in elementary, there are 182 schools with English learners progress reported, and there are 699 in the reading and math elementary schools total. So I was just wondering how English learners were assigned to schools, or if I can imagine some schools not having any, but I was wondering if there was any kind of assignment in areas where there were only a few within a district, for example, whether they'd all go to one school.
Sure. There are large pockets within Kentucky that that bring English learners into the state. There are centers for refugees that come into Kentucky. There are very friendly cities that have like churches and programs and supportive areas for that. So there's pockets of Kentucky that bring in purposefully to support refugees, but in other areas of the state, there are areas that don't have English non-English learners or English learners, and that is not assigned or anything like that from the state. It's by way of how the families are migrating or into our different communities. The local school district, it is, since there are local control in the school districts, they then decide how they are going to support their English learners. There are some districts that have programs or specific schools that are focused on the needs of recently arrived students, like newcomer academies and things of that nature. Other districts that have fewer English learners don't have that type of program, that they're all focused in on a school. So it's really a combination of where they are enrolled and how they are coming into our communities in the state. So it's really just a result of their coming into our communities.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pete?
Thank you. This is Pete. Two questions and a kind of a follow on to Suzanne's questions in terms of the new change component for the accountability system. Have you done any, or are you planning to do any sort of independent analyses of characteristics of schools that are associated with change and subgroups? Just looking at the change piece. I know you mentioned that overall there weren't many big changes to the system, but just focusing on change in terms of who changed, who is likely to change by school and student characteristic. And then the second question, part B of that is, have you or are you planning to talk to any stakeholders to see what their interpretation of the change part is? So how do they interpret what they're seeing, and what are they thinking about schools, and what does that mean to them?
Those are really good research questions, and that's the type of feedback that we are hoping to get from our KTAC members. So thank you, Pete, for that. We do have interest in the new system because it is so different as far as including that change element in that. And it would be interesting to note where the change is happening in particular areas or particular schools or within the different student demographic groups.
Yeah, I'll add too, Jennifer. I think it's a very good suggestion, Pete, and we'll do some analysis of those schools and their makeup. And I think that's one. This is our first year of change data since it's the second year of data. But I think with the additional coming this year's data for 24, that will hopefully provide more information about if we can consistently see improvement or change in the schools that are making improvements, if there's something, a pattern there. So we'll focus on that. Thank you.
Corinne
and then Suzanne.
and Suzanne.
Yeah, it's Corinne Huggins-Manley, University of Florida. I was just going to follow up on Suzanne's as well, and thinking about initiatives. You were saying that there's more in place for reading and all, and they're working on math. Are they thinking about these three particular groups that Kevin talked about that really do stand out in the report, the African American students with disability and English learner? Are there specific things to think about those gaps?
I wouldn't want to speak for the Office of Teaching and Learning and what they are projecting or planning for, but I do think that there is a need overall for the core instruction from the tier 1 instruction to look at not only how it is presented, but also the resources that are being used within the classroom to make sure that all students have access to on grade level resources that align to the standards. So I think that's one of the main areas that is a focus, that teachers have resources that are aligned to Kentucky standards, because the books and resources that are used that are good and they're quality resources, but they may not be aligned to specifically the grade level content within Kentucky. So I think that's an analysis that the Office of Teaching and Learning takes the groups through first, and to see if things are aligned in what the teachers are teaching to matches Kentucky state standards. And then, so to get that core instruction and resources first, and then look further into our students and the needs that our different student demographic groups needs. And I see Kevin O came online. Do you have additions to that?
I think Jennifer, you're spot on. I mean, obviously we can't speak for the other offices, but we do know that based upon collaboration within, that there is a lot of additional resources that they are working on. You know, that we're hoping to be able to move out to schools and districts across the Commonwealth and soon. And again, you know, with that focus being to try to focus on those content areas that would be deemed struggling, and the groups that are identified there as struggling as well. So again, that focus has not shifted, and so they're continuing to push in those areas.
Yeah, just as a follow-up and I guess broad recommendation, I know you do some of this, but you know, some of it also should probably be within the assessment and accountability unit in terms of, you know, really reviewing accommodations allowed for testing and different things that they might have disadvantages for in testing itself as well. Just an important ongoing thing to look at.
Thank you. I think Suzanne and then Brian.
This is Suzanne again. I think doing research and trying to characterize those schools who are perhaps showing change or not showing change, what's the makeup of the students, for example, et cetera, is very important, what has already been said. And in addition, I think some states are trying to or thinking about ways to look at schools who are actually showing change and trying to characterize what they are doing in instruction or other areas to support this change, especially for schools who might be at the lower end of the score scale or not performing as well, but actually are demonstrating improved scores on the assessment, trying to handle what are they doing, you know, what's inside of that school to support this. I think that would be an important area to look at, and to use perhaps some of these schools as models, to highlight them also.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Phoebe, did you want to follow up on any of these comments?
Yes, I really like Suzanne's suggestion about doing research, and building off of that. It's important not only to look at what schools are doing well and what they're doing, but to make sure that those are things that have somewhat of a causal effect. Also look at schools that aren't doing well, because both those schools that aren't doing well and schools that are doing well could be doing the same thing. Let's say they have reading groups, both of them have reading groups, but if you look at only who's doing well, you might get some spurious information. So it's basically looking at all 4 cells, doing well, not doing well, what they're doing, what they're not doing, if that makes sense.
And within the state, we do have what we call local labs of learning. And those schools are trying innovative practices that have potential to impact student outcomes and performance. So those schools open up to other districts and education leaders so that they can come and learn from them. So I think that part of that research could be looking at those schools that are doing those innovative practices and seeing how they are performing as well. So thank you. Thanks to everyone.
Jennifer, my comment was along the same lines. I think that in most states, the assessments are viewed as pretty high quality. They give valid and reliable and fair information about large scale things. The accountability systems, differ, but they embody the values that the states have and the constraints, and they that's implemented well, and it gives ratings for schools. But the key for school improvement is not in having good identifications, is what comes after it. And I think that what the KTAC is saying is, the Office of Assessment Accountability is not the primary one responsible for school supports, but if there's some systematic way to join analyses of the data that OAA has to help identify, that may help guide the Office of Teaching and Learning about what to look at specifically. Because if they go and support individual schools, they may be missing out on the larger pattern about what's causing things. So I think many of the KTAC members' comments were that a systematic effort might help unlock things that are promising. So two things. One is I think OAA has some capacity to do some of that analysis, but I think HMRO we've heard from them about their validity studies, and maybe that you could ask them to do some of these analyses that would connect opportunity to learn with outcomes, and they may have more resources to do some. I know that they've got this sort of year cycle, so they may not be able to get to it this year. The other is just a small point. It was a follow-up about the EL students. So what is Kentucky's minimum N, and how many EL students do you know, if maybe you just know offhand, how many EL students are not included in accountability because they are in schools where the EL student is smaller than the minimum N? So we looked at the number of schools, but I'm asking about the percent of students who are included in the schools that meet the minimum N. I don't know, Kevin, that might be something for a later time.
Yeah, I don't think it's something we have off the cuff, but it's one, as Jennifer mentioned, there's pockets of EL populations in certain cities in Kentucky which are really focused. So and our in count rule is 30. So that's one thing, and we do reporting. So if you actually dig into our school report card and look at the reporting pieces, we have a rule of 10 for reporting. So there's a lot more EL data reported that's not in the accountability rule of in count of 30. But we could dig into that and probably get some of those numbers. I have the guys looking at that, and we can share that later.
Thank you.
I'll just add, Brian.
Go ahead, Jennifer. Sorry.
I'll just add for our KTAC members that it was recently that we changed to a minimum N of 30. For years, it had been a minimum N of 10. And what we found is that there were variabilities in the data as well as in the population that we found that schools would have a population one year and may not have a population the next, and so forth. So there was a good bit of variability within the schools and within that. So we took this step, and I want to say it was either in 2021, sometime in that time frame. We proposed to the Kentucky Board of Education to increase that minimum N from 10 to 30 for accountability, but then remain at 10, as Kevin was saying, for reporting, so that we would have that transparency there for the populations that the school have, or the students.
Jennifer, do I remember correctly that it was not, previously it was not only a minimum of 10, but it was 10 per grade, which in many schools actually translated out to something like 30, except that if you could have 11 and 9 and 10, and then the 9 would actually fall below the 10 per grade. Am I remembering that correct? So it sounded like I remember it's a little more complicated than just minimum of 10.
It is. It was much more complicated than that. Yes.
KTAC members, any other questions for the department folks in terms of the review of the assessment and accountability results? Really appreciate the comments and questions.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I think it's back to me again. So I'm going to just give I guess more than anything, a statement on where our assessment development is on as of January 17th, 2024 at 11:58 a.m. Special thanks again to Kevin Hill and Jennifer who joined us. I always tell folks he's the important Kevin. They let me hang out, make me feel cool. So very appreciative of that, and very appreciative of them being available this morning to assist us in this great conversation. A lot of good ideas. We've heard a lot of good conversations about some potential research and analyses that we can do to help us to enforce hopefully a progressive learning style across the Commonwealth and to be able to benefit our students. So we're definitely excited to take those recommendations back and start to talk about our other partners here at the department. So one of the things that Jennifer mentioned was that our legislation is in our General Assembly's meeting this spring. This is our long session, so it'll run into April. But right now, where we are as of this moment in our assessment development plans is staying where we are. And for that, there's a couple of key factors at both federal and state levels that kind of spearhead our thinking as to why we're focused on, staying the course. This year, federally, is the presidential election year, and without knowing the outcome or potential change in an administration, our goal is to continue to follow the current federal guidance that's been provided to us and to move that forward. Again, the Kentucky legislation is currently meeting. They come together on January 2nd, and this session actually runs through April 15th. So, Jennifer noted that since 2016, we have experienced some level of change. So changes could definitely come out of this session. At that point, once those changes go into law, then we will begin work immediately. Obviously, as we're thinking about those, we're going to incorporate and how those would be incorporated into our current assessment design. Focus specifically on our large scale assessment end of year, our summative. We're measuring reading and math at all grades 3 through 8, as well as at grade 10 at high school. We measure science once per grade span at 4, 7, and 11. And then social studies, on-demand writing, and editing mechanics, we measure at grades 5, 8, and 11. So again, once per grade span. Jennifer kind of touched on this momentarily, but I'll note that our afternoon session today is going to provide some wonderful discussion and feature areas that could become part of the future of Kentucky assessments. The Kentucky United We Learn, or the Cool Council, will be discussed when we come back from our afternoon break. I'm definitely excited to hear from Karen Dodd and Penny Christian about some of the vibrant and innovative work that those committees that they're involved with are currently working on, and so they're going to give some great feedback there. To note, at this time, it's there's very limited information that I can share about the future of Kentucky assessments, other than as of this moment, we are not undergoing any change. So as we move forward, if changes are proposed, we will be discussing those changes in future KTAC meetings. As a matter of fact, when we come together in March, we may have changes to share with you then. So that's the case. And Karen did share that Penny is unable to join us today. So we're glad to have you, Karen, and know that you'll do a great job. Know that you'll definitely do a great job. I can share, though, that this is not actually a change, but one thing that we're working on is utilizing some federal dollars that we were able to obtain. And one of the goals has been to work to shorten our assessment administration time. And so, we try to collect feedback and look at from our test administrators, our local educators, and about the amount of time that students are engaged, seat time that they're spending on the test administration. And so, one of our goals was, how can we shorten the test but still maintain alignment and a valid assessment administration? And so what our focus is at this time is to use some of those federal dollars to develop test items that can increase our assessment item bank across content areas. And again, keep that focus on shortening our test administration time as well. We're anticipating this work to kick off in late February to early March, with the expectation to be final by late August. And so with that being said, I'd be happy to entertain any questions if we have any. I think, Phoebe, you have your hand up.
Yeah, and forgive me for not remembering. Did you decide not to use a matrix sampling design? I know at one point that there was some discussion of matrix sampling content.
So we are focused on a combination of common and matrix sampling, just in order to. One of the big key factors is our item release. We're required by law to release a subset of items every year, and so obviously keeping relevant to some common items is definitely something we focus on. But we are incorporating a combination of both common and matrix sampling in our current administration.
And are you going to try to leverage that for keep getting the test a little shorter by maybe increasing the matrix sampled or decreasing the score information at the student level?
So we are looking at in the areas of broadening obviously test forms and looking at the impact that we could have there in order to incorporate a shorter administration time. A lot of the different areas that we need to, we're still collecting evidence, we're still collecting data as we work with our current vendors, Pearson, to look at how much time students are actually engaged versus the current build of the test even. And so I think there's a lot of different factors that we're going to have to follow through. You'll hear a little bit around tomorrow when you meet with their, some talks around pre-equating, and we're hoping to get some feedback from you all as well there on those methods and how we can incorporate that. All of those kind of create that perfect concoction for where we want to end up at. So
Thank you.
well, thank you, Phoebe. Great question. Brian, is a question for me, or you may have something to add to that?
Oh no, Brian. This is Brian. I do have a question. Kevin, I think I remember that the Kentucky Department of Education is required to do standards review of the content standards periodically. Usually when that happens, there will be some standards that change, and then the test specifications sometimes need to change in order to reflect the changed standards. So what is the department's plans for doing that? In particular, are you planning to try to maintain trend across those types of changes, and maybe that will be part of what we hear about with the discussion on the equating?
Yeah, great question, Brian. And I think they will touch on that just a bit. But as you noted, legislation back in 2017 did require that our academic standards go through a revision once every 6 years. So they're on a current rotation, starting with reading and writing, and then math. And most recently, we had science that was adopted back in July of this year. So that rotation for reading and writing, I think, comes around again in 2025, maybe. So next year. So again, they're in a 6-year rotation. They have to be reviewed once every 6 years. One of the things, that we have saw up to this point, we've not saw a lot of necessarily new standards introduced. We have saw some revisions. I know with science in particular, we saw some shifts in grade administration. Or where they fall in the grade range. So some moved up, some moved down. Which, of course, if that then shifts a grade range, then that could impact for instructional purposes how they're being introduced. So, obviously, anytime that you experience any type of change in the instructional model and then leading up to the assessment design and build, that could have an impact on obviously, as Kevin noted earlier, the results, and how that they're being provided locally. So, those are all facets that we're continuing to look at. And again, with that being part of our regulatory language, we do have to make those type of decisions on how they're incorporated and implemented. Any other questions? I will do my best to answer them as to the best of my ability. If not, I'll get results and bring them back in March. How's that?
Yeah, just the Pearson folks are on tomorrow. Maybe if you could give an example of the types of changes. It sounds like science may have been a little bit larger than some of the other ones, but how were what were the changes in content standards? What were the changes in blueprints? And then how was that handled in terms of maintaining the scale or changing the scale or equating from one year to the next? I think that would be of interest, and KTAC may be able to give some advice about because that's always there's always this balance between trying to keep the tests and the content standards current, but then also maintain trend. That's a tough balancing act.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one that we could look at collecting some more evidence and maybe even bring it back as early as March to talk about those. And you're right, Brian. The shifts that we've experienced in the standards, they have not been what I would call overwhelming, if you will. They, obviously, anytime we have a change in standards, then it's going to implement a standard setting, which is going to then could result in changes in your scales and ranges, and so that ultimately could impact the trend. So again, the way that the rotations occur, with every 2 years, and again, we've not saw a drastic amount of changes like wipe them clean and start over, and our stakeholders are the ones that are educators across the state are the ones that are they're making these decisions. They're looking at the standards, they're looking at how they're teaching the standards, and so a lot of that is their level of comfort with the instruction, whether they think it's advantageous for the students to build off of the current model that they have. So again, we're always open to that, and definitely want to be able to do our due diligence in order to provide back to our schools and districts. So.
Suzanne, did you have your hand raised?
I did have my hand raised, and I was going to second what you said, Brian. It would be nice to have some additional information to see the extent to which these changes are going to affect the scale, because, every state wants to maintain the trend, and that's difficult if there's a lot of changes. And then I did have a question. Did you, and I might have misheard you, so I apologize in advance if I did, but did you also indicate that one of the goals is to further reduce the number of items per exam?
And what we're focused on right now, obviously, is trying to reduce the amount of time of administration. I did say that we're working on development of new items. So that could play a course in the reduction of items. I think our main thing is maintaining that accuracy to our assessment blueprints, and so if we could shore up the number of items in a smaller manner, and that would definitely, I guess, help reduce some of the testing time, but our main focus is still maintaining that alignment to our assessment blueprints.
And in thinking about reducing time, I mean, there's a couple of ways to do that. That is just in general, reduce items or reduce types of items, because your assessments have a large number of items that are constructed response, right? So I am not advocating for this whatsoever, but is there a intent to try to reduce the number of constructed response as a way to reduce time?
Well, that's definitely, Suzanne, that's definitely one of the areas that we've talked about is, it's a lot easier to when you focus on the build of that test and the amount of time that's being impacted. We do time studies with each administration, and obviously our constructive response is the one that's taking students the most time, as they have to a lot of times they do pre-writings and things that much more time time consuming than obviously a multiple choice, multiple select, or even a TE item. So that is one area that we have focused on is how do we we don't want to do away with per se those type of items, but we want to maybe as we look at the design and the build of our assessments moving forward, look at how can we shift them up a little bit and still maintain that alignment.
This is just a follow-up. This is Suzanne again. I mean, it might be, and I'm sure you're doing this already, but it might be a good idea to really look at what you're trying to assess with those items and the types of knowledge and skills, you know, the cognitive activity that the kids have to go through to perform on the items, and see if there are other ways to assess them. I'm not saying get rid of the constructed response necessarily, but sometimes there might be a different method to assess them that could be a bit quicker. So really systematic look at the items, what they're assessing, how they're assessing it, if they actually are assessing what you want to assess.
Absolutely. No, very, very good. Thank you for that. Phoebe?
Yes, I agree with Suzanne. If an item's taking a lot of time and not giving you any information that's different or central to the standards, then it can be replaced. I think that's what Suzanne, I'm sorry, was talking about was is the core part in terms of it. This isn't necessarily only from a statistical perspective. There may be items that are taking a lot of time and don't give you much statistical information, but are important because of the aspect of the standard they test. They test a central concept of it. And stats aren't going to tell you anything. You may not, I mean, it may correlate the same as a multiple choice item does, but the qualitative, you know, when you've looked at the cognitive processes kids have to go through, they're closer to what you want in order to be. So I guess it's not, and I know Kentucky does this, it's not aligned with just the topic in the standards, but aligned with the depth with which you want students to learn that topic. But I do think there are that kind of analysis when doing item development is still in its infancy. I think before we used to say, well, it says right, so let's do right. When sometimes what it meant, part of that writing was to be able to edit well. Part of it was to generate and part was to edit. And if you added a multiple choice editing question, people would, you know, go, including me, screaming into the street. Without realizing that you are actually getting to the skill you want.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that, Phoebe. No, I think both you and Suzanne make very, very good points, you know, and things we have talked about to some degree. What, you know, how much bang are we getting for our buck, if you will, on those constructed response or those extended response items and their relevance, you know, across content areas and across grade ranges. Because if the outcome is the same, right? If what you're looking for is the same, then and you're getting the same results from another item type in a third of the time. So, Suzanne, I'm sorry.
Another thing to add to what Phoebe's been saying and what I said before is, you know, Kentucky, Brian mentioned early that I was on the Kentucky TAC way back when. And way back when there was a lot of performance-based assessments, et cetera, you know, so, and I think another reason to have certain items, certain types of assessments is that it provides a signal of what you think is important. So when people, when folks in the schools see performance assessments or constructed response, it's like, oh, so mathematics is explaining as well, for example. So I know we're far ahead of when I was on the Kentucky TAC before, when the signal was extremely important. But to keep that back in your mind too, that what you're saying to the educators and others of what you value, it should be considered when you're thinking about changing item types, etc.
Absolutely. Pete, I'm sorry, I think Pete.
Uh, yeah, so I think along these lines, and you've probably done this sort of thing, but um, I think it'd be useful, especially when you're thinking about time, is to look at the telemetry data in terms of you probably have specific information on your constructed response, and even other types of items in terms of so it's not just the psychometrics in terms of how it affects the standard errors and those sorts of things, but you can also compare it to time on item task, you might say, and make some decisions based on that. And I think correspondingly for your items that have multiple score points, to look at the distribution of those score points, because I've seen in many instances where you have a 4-point item, but students are only scoring either a 1 or a 2, or let's say a 1 or a 4. And what does that tell you about the item and the information that it's actually conveying, even though you're trying to make it more informative, but it isn't functioning in that way. So I think there's some other things that one can do to make some choices among the items.
No, absolutely. Thank you for that, Pete. Definitely, a lot of good information and good ideas there that I think we'll definitely take them back as we sit down to have those discussions about next steps and further develop our assessment, and hopefully be able to do just that, is to shorten our tests, but they'll still be able to maintain the same level of integrity that we have. So appreciate all that good conversation. Definitely. Thank you all.
Kevin, I really appreciate your presentation and handling of the questions, along with your colleagues, Jennifer and Kevin Hill. But we didn't have a break schedule, but I wonder if it would be okay if we took a 10-minute break and then came back, and we'll make sure that the Cavion folks have their full time. But do you think that'd be all right if we allow people to take a break now?
I think so. Yeah, I'd seen that Walt and Joe and Mark had joined us, but definitely I think folks get up and stretch your leg, and then we can come back to that. So, okay.
What if we plan to start promptly at 12:35? Yeah, 12:35. So it's just a little over 10 minutes.
Yep, I think that sounds good.
This is Brian Gong. We're glad to resume the Kentucky Technical Advisory Committee meeting after our break. And we appreciate having colleagues from Cavion here to lead a presentation and discussion of an exciting topic that is still fairly new for most states, which is remote virtual testing and security and other considerations. So Walt, if you and your colleagues would just introduce yourselves briefly, we'd appreciate it, and then we'll turn the time over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brian. So I'll go ahead for Cavion. It's a pleasure to be here today to speak to the Kentucky TAC. My name is Walt Drain. I am the Director of Education Services at Cavion. I've been in this position now for 5.5 years. Before, some of you will remember me at the Mississippi Department of Education. There, I served as both the state assessment director and an accountability director. So I headed up both of those shops for the state. So I do recognize several people on this TAC that are in this room today. So over to you, Mark, and then we'll hear from Joe.
Thanks, Walt, and thanks to everyone on the TAC and Kevin for having us. My name is Mark Weinstein. I am Vice President of Cavion's Audit and Response Solutions team. I'm also the company's Chief Privacy Officer. So I started my career as a lawyer. I'm still a practicing attorney. I've been practicing law for 25 years. That's how I got into the field of testing and assessment. I've been working in testing and assessment for about half of my law practice. and started working with Cavion directly in 2014. And in fact, in the first matter I worked on with Cavion, it was for the Mississippi Department of Education. So in my capacity as the leader of the Audit and Response Solutions team, we help clients like state departments of education, a number of whom are our clients, to identify vulnerabilities in their programs and come up with solutions to help eliminate those vulnerabilities. Our team is also responsible for conducting security audits for state departments of education and for monitoring test administrations. Maybe Joe can share with us how many state assessment administrations we've observed over the years, but I can tell you that the number is in the thousands at this point, and it may be over 10,000. And we learn a lot from watching tests get administered, and really strive to ensure that our clients get the value of those lessons to help improve their programs. So, privileged to have the opportunity to speak to you today, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Thanks, Mark. So Joe Kamel, I've been with Cavion since 2016, working alongside Mark, conducting state assessment monitoring, investigations, and so on in several states. Prior to coming over to Cavion, I worked for the American Board of Radiology, where I held several hats from test development through test administration and delivery and test security. So worked closely with Cavion for data forensics back then, and as well as Mark from a legal standpoint in developing our test security program at the American Board of Radiology. Happy to be here today, happy to present with y'all. To answer Mark's question, I don't know an exact number, but we are definitely in the tens of thousands across several different states. I believe I myself have been in 6 different states and conducting state assessment monitoring. So, and that doesn't include what we've done in the certification and licensure industry as well. So I will stop there and kick it back over to you all. Thanks.
All right, well, I'll kick us off and get us started here. I do want to draw attention to this particular document that I've got in hand. I know, Kevin, you've already got this particular book that Cavion put out a year ago. It's very applicable. It's addressing new challenges in the security of statewide assessments, a guide for states in the post-pandemic era. So there's a lot of great information in this book that I really would point both the TAC and KDE staff to look at. And if you need a copy, please feel free to reach out to me through Kevin, and I will get you a copy because I feel like the TAC, you guys need to have this on your shelf. We even covered this topic in this book on remote testing. So that's chapter 3. So where did this come from? This remote test administration is something new, as Brian mentioned earlier, and it grew out of the pandemic. But now that the genie is out of the bottle, there's no putting it back in. In fact, this remote test administration, I would say, was born out of desperation. Yet it offers a level of flexibility and convenience that various levels of stakeholders wish to maintain. So I really see a growing number of states gravitating toward exploring the option of remote testing, and would definitely encourage both this TAC and the department as you walk through this road of consideration to take it slow and be thoughtful, deliberate, and intentional in all the decisions that are made along the way. Because we've seen that states that implement very quickly and in haste tend to have a lot more lessons learned and in fact run to major issues that could be avoided by taking it slower. There are lots of advantages to remote testing, and there's lots of concerns with remote testing. A lot of advantages. There's some believe that logistics are easier than in school testing because facilities and classrooms don't have to be prepared in advance. In-school training requirements are potentially reduced. This is thoughts, right? This is what people think the advantages are. The same with computer-based testing, remote testing. There's no test booklets or printed materials that are required. Scoring is expedited, just like it is with traditional computer-based testing. Proctors can monitor tests from anywhere. That's with human proctoring as well as AI proctoring. Students gain convenience from testing remotely, whether it's at home or in some other area. Teachers may lose less instruction time too to test taking because, again, they're testing in a remote environment. But the bottom line, these scores are used in accountability. All right, so that's why I have this validity triangle on the screen, because at the end of the day, we're trying to protect the validity of those scores. We oftentimes think about psychometrics, we think about content, but do we think about security? And in this diagram, as you see, security is the foundation of ensuring validity of test scores. So we have to ensure that we're focusing on the security. And that new normal presents challenges for the comparability of scores, in fact, between students, schools, and districts. And test security and the fidelity of administration is definitely warranted. And while the benefits of remote test administrations are generally appealing, they cannot be implemented at the cost of trustworthy test scores. When scores are used to make critical student, educator, and accountability decisions, we must be confident in the validity of the scores by wrapping a sound test security process around all aspects of test and item design, development, administration, and scoring. So as we move through this PowerPoint, you'll get an understanding of some states that have gone down this road, some states that have shied away and tried it and backed out. And then toward the end of this presentation, we want to go over a case study, I guess, if you will, of some success that states that have implemented remote testing have gone through. Like, what are some things that work, right? And what are some pitfalls to avoid? So that's the flow. When we look at the recent history of remote testing, let me preface this by saying this particular data over the next few slides came from Assessment Solutions Group. That's a partner that Cavion reached out to get some of this historical information. ASG routinely, annually, in fact, ask state assessment directors to complete a survey. And one of the questions on the survey is their use of remote testing. And in 2021, there were 9 states that administered remote testing. That dropped to 2022. That dropped to 8 in the year 2022. And this list right here is not inclusive. I'm trying to peel information from the 2023 data, but that will not be released until the upcoming CCSSO TILSA meeting in February, where ASG will release more current information. So on this particular topic with states that are using remote testing, I would advise the TAC and Kentucky DOE to look at that report when it becomes available in mid-February. But states that have allowed it, we see California, Hawaii, Michigan, Ohio, and this list is not inclusive. There are others. States that plan to allow remote testing in the spring of 24. Florida is looking at it only for their interim and formative assessments, not the summative assessments. So please keep that in mind. Kansas and West Virginia both have new legislation. We are seeing an uptick in advocacy groups that are going to the legislatures in various states to lobby for laws that allow for remote test administration options, particularly from virtual learning advocacies that are out there. So in other words, students that take classes online or have some sort of learning environment where they're being taught every day in a remote environment, then these advocacy groups would like those students to be tested in their normal learning environment, which is remote at home. So the push for this legislation is growing in states, and we see that this year in Kansas and West Virginia. Those are two states that are having to implement remote testing in 2024. So I would encourage you to reach out to those states to see what they are doing for further implementation. And I see there's questions. Kevin, how would you like the flow of questions to go at the end or as we go through? Either is fine with us.
Why don't we go ahead, Walt, if it's okay, and go ahead and handle questions, especially if they're clarification types of questions or right on the topic. Suzanne?
I was going to ask, what are some of the main reasons why states are going remote? And one of them that you said is because some students are virtual to begin with, but what are the other reasons for those students who are not receiving their instruction virtually? Why are they going remote? I was surprised to see so many states. I serve on a number of TACs, but I don't serve on any TACs that have are considering remote, except for this one now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the ultimate push is the virtual student, right? The student that there's more and more students who this hybrid learning, you know, whether it's in person or online. I just think that there's a push for more flexibility among state tests. Mark, would you like to weigh in on this?
Thanks, Walt. Yeah, I mean, I think that states have, since COVID, become more permissive in allowing students to attend school virtually. And particularly, I mean, let me just give you an example, the state of Hawaii, where they have, you know, many communities that have extreme poverty, and I know Kentucky does as well. And, you know, that where the locations of families are extremely remote, and getting to school itself is very problematic. And weather conditions, extreme weather conditions, can exacerbate, you know, that dynamic. And so, as Walt mentioned, during the pandemic, these families actually found it much easier, and the communities found it much easier to educate the kids remotely. And so, but then they were still having to drag them in to test. And so now they have the opportunity to administer these tests remotely, and it aligns with their objectives of, you know, making it easier, especially for disadvantaged families that are in geographically remote areas, you know, to make it easier for them to test, particularly if they're already attending, for example, a remote charter program.
Can I ask another question? For those states that are allowing this for, and I can see the reason why it makes sense for those students who are receiving virtual instruction, are they limiting the virtual administration for those individuals, or do they let others apply for it? And I was going to ask Kentucky why they are considering remote. Is it because of these rural areas that are receiving virtual instruction?
So I guess I could go ahead, Suzanne, and try to address the Kentucky question specifically. One of the things that, as Walt noted, after the pandemic, we've saw a lot more restructuring, if you will, of students, and the virtual has become played a large role in that. So we're starting to see a major increase in the number of students that are remote learning, whether it be within their own district or starting to even see learning agencies across the state where students are, they're enrolling in somewhere maybe 3 hours away at the other side of the state and receiving their public education there. So as obviously, as we see those things, in our mind, think about how would it be the best way to serve those students. And, obviously, as Walt and Mark have shared, there's a lot of things to think about whenever you look at administering an assessment, a secure assessment online. And that's definitely, cause for concern for us. So we always want to be aware of the new opportunities and technologies that are out there, and maybe something that we could put out for our districts and schools and students to utilize. But right now, just more than anything, we're just trying to do that research before we make any type of commitments there.
Yeah, and as far as why do states jump down this road or go down this path, I think, as Kevin alluded to, and as we've already previously stated, it's mainly the genie's out of the bottle after COVID, and that was an option that was allowed early on during the pandemic and after the pandemic during testing, and people enjoyed the flexibility and want to continue the flexibility. And I really think that as these virtual charter schools, these virtual schools in general, virtual classrooms, hybrid approaches to learning, online is just becoming more and more attractive. So this is nothing that is new in the area of certification, licensure, and industry, but for K-12, I think it is, right? This is something new that is being explored. And also, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of lobbying groups that are gravitating toward these virtual learning outfits that provide a K-12 experience, and they're pushing for that in different state legislations to be, laws written. And it would be great that if these lawmakers put in some sort of boundaries or bumpers, if you will, that kind of create some sort of at least tight guidelines for states to consider and to administer, because otherwise, without those parameters, then it gets back to that validity triangle. You can have psychometrics and content, but if there's no security, then those scores are going to be compromised. And how? I mean, there's all kind of issues at home. Just think about parents who may want to help their child succeed on the exam, or students pulling out their cell phone and just Googling the answers, right? There's a whole bunch to discuss, but we will definitely get into that later in the presentation. So if we can just hold that thought and move forward. So pending legislation allowing for remote testing, again, I hadn't looked at a lot of states that are starting their legislative work for 2024, but a lot of states have just picked that work up beginning in January. So I would expect a lot of new legislation to potentially come out this spring and be implemented July 1 for next school year. You'll see on the screen, no longer allowing remote testing is Massachusetts. I know that that is one state that's been very vocal against remote testing because some of the challenges that they experienced after the pandemic, when it was hastily tried during spring summative testing. Another one that considered but did not authorize is Louisiana, and that was due to cost prohibitive. And Joe can speak to that more if we need to get into more detail there. Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we can look more into the security concerns and take a deeper dive into that area.
Thanks, Walt. Before I dive into this topic, I see Corinne has her hand raised, and I just want to, if her topic relates to the things we just spoke about, maybe we should just address that before we dive into this next segment.
Yeah, hi, it's Corinne Huggins-Manley. I have a lot of questions, but I'll leave it to you. I think these are just clarifying what you've said, but you can also, table them for the end if you think it's better. Are there advocacy groups outside of virtual schools and all too, or is that pretty much the main group? And are there any groups that have been vocal against it, from particular student groups or anything?
Well, that's one that I'm not really tuned into. I certainly am familiar with the push by cyber charters, which have been expanding to allow, for summative testing to be administered remotely. I don't know about, other advocacy groups or stakeholder communities that have been lobbying one way or the other.
Yeah, no, I think, and this is purely my professional take on this, so there may be another answer that I have not found yet in my research, but I'm seeing it only in the virtual settings, right? Those are the ones that are advocating for a push to go down the remote testing, again, to provide a test experience that's similar in nature as their day-to-day learning environment.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and the answers to Suzanne's question are really helpful. I can see like who would benefit and who wants it. I think I'm confused though, because I think the major advantage thrown out was that it would save instructional time, but I don't understand that, right? I think that assumes that if they remote test, they're going to do it on the weekend or something. I mean, that that would be odd, but also we would have to assume that they're already instructing in person, and we're going to save that. But it sounds like that's not the group that would even do this. It would be those already. So I'm just confused on how that's an advantage. If you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think that's really in there for the virtual setting, right? Because you're right, it doesn't help or hurt or play into any effect of the brick and mortar, right? Because the brick and mortar building, those students are going into a classroom, they're going to follow the test administration process, and even scoring, right, and reporting, you still have to wait for collection of all those materials as well. So I think the benefit to the group when we talk about teachers may lose less instruction time to test taking are only those who are offering instruction virtually or remotely. But yeah, did that answer your question, Corinne?
Yeah, I think so. It's still a little rough in the sense of if the students are taking a test, it seems like it's a similar amount of time. But I do know what you mean about all the preparation, particularly if you're a virtual school and now you have to somehow for in person. That might be a big leap.
Well,
yeah.
There's one other example where there could be a savings in instructional time. That is, if the test is administered remotely by someone other than, for example, the assigned teacher for that student cohort. We've seen a lot of testing, like I mentioned, and we've seen a lot of wasted time. In other words, the test is ongoing. You've got half the kids in the room who finished the test already. And then you have the rest of the kids who are still taking the test. And the kids who have finished, they're sitting there, they're doing nothing. And they're waiting until the test is finished. And if you have a remote test and you're not, using the same teacher to administer the test, students, when they finish the test, can immediately go back to instructional time. So that's one example that could, lend credence to what Walt was suggesting, that it could save instructional time. If it's okay with the group, I'm going to dive into this next topic. And, really what I want to address here is if you're thinking about potentially creating a remote proctored summative assessment program, here are concerns you want to be thinking about, okay? One of the major issues, of course, is lack of control of the environment and lack of visibility into the environment. And those are two things that we have, 100% of for in-person testing. And I know we've been throwing around the terms remote and virtual, and I just want to be clear, what we mean is you have students taking the test in a place that is like in a different building than wherever the proctor is, and they're using some kind of, online interface on a device that is with the student, and the proctor is somewhere else, like not in the next room, but in another building, maybe 100 miles away, whatever the case may be. So it's really the proctor is having to use technology to do a job that they would not necessarily need technology to do if they were there in person with the student. And, everybody's familiar with lockdown browsers, and lockdown browsers are great, but there are still, other aspects of a computer that you don't have control over if you're doing remote online proctored administration. You also don't know what the student's doing when they take breaks, assuming that they're allowed to take breaks. And, we talk about the limited ability to prevent or detect capturing of test content. If you look at my surroundings, you would be hard pressed to find, a camera that I have, in the painting behind me that's trained and focused on my screen and could capture everything that is happening on it. And certainly, that may not be something that a student is likely to do. It certainly crops up in the certification and licensure space, but it is a threat that you should be aware of because it's nearly impossible to detect when another device is being used to capture content on the screen during testing. Another really insidious, difficult threat to thwart is that of remote desktop proxies. And again, this really comes from the certification and licensure space. And so let me just give you, a quick explainer on this. This is where, so if I'm the person who has applied, or, if I'm taking the test, right? But I know I'm not going to do well on it, so I'm going to get someone else to take it for me. And maybe I'm going to get someone in India to take it for me. And I say India because a lot of this is happening from India. But it doesn't have to be India. It could be Peoria. It could be anywhere else. The point is that a remote desktop proxy installs a desktop application that runs in the background, and it's running before the test is even initiated. So it can run even with a lockdown browser occurring. And these remote desktop proxy software applications are changing all the time. So in other words, if a lockdown browser gets updated, they just use a different path for the application. So they're very hard to detect. And essentially what happens is you may be viewing me and it may look like I'm taking the test, but it's actually the person who's connected to my computer through the desktop application that is responding to the prompts and controlling what's happening in the browser during testing. So it seems like that's not a super high risk threat for state summative assessments, but you should be aware that can happen. The other thing that can happen, and Walt started to mention it, is unauthorized assistance either in the room or on the breaks. Of course, I could easily have, if I'm a student, I can have my parent on the other side of my computer, right? and they could be coaching me, right? Or it's a break. I go into the other room. I'm asking my big brother or big sister, hey, what's the answer to this question? So, that comes back to the sort of higher level concern of you don't have visibility into the environment. Another concern that has to be addressed when thinking about a program like this is the student to proctor ratio. And that is, it's one thing when a test administrator or proctor is in a room and there's 25 students testing. It's pretty easy to view the entire room, to spend time walking around the room, changing your position to be able to monitor the test administration. But it's a very different story, with a proctor who's looking at a screen, okay? And I think that the number that we say should be the absolute highest is 8 to 1. And we've done a lot of auditing of remote proctored test administrations, including in the remote proctoring centers, professional remote proctoring centers. And when a proctor has to give their attention to one test taker because maybe they have a technical issue or they have a question, when the proctor's interacting with that one test taker, there's no way they are paying attention to anything that's happening anywhere else on the screen. So, that's a concern. Next slide, please, Walt. The other concerns, and we're a test security company, but in the work we do, we can't just like function in a vacuum, right? So when you're thinking about, a remote proctored test administration, you can't think about it without also thinking about fairness. And so some of those concerns include student and family privacy. I mean, I'm putting that under the heading of fairness. You could argue that it's actually a category all unto itself. But certainly, students are testing from their homes. There will be other people present. It's possible that the person administering the test could have insight into interactions between family members, people who aren't part of the testing process. And so, there are concerns about invasion of privacy. By the way, this presupposes, and I should have said this from the outset, I mean, you can't really do effective high stakes testing remotely without using a minimum of one camera. And really, you should have the audio as well from the computer. So you're seeing, your proctors or test administrators are seeing into that test taker's environment. So there is a privacy concern. And, I've certainly heard the concerns of even having the images of the student testing is in and of itself a privacy concern. I think we're beyond that now. I mean, that's my opinion. I'm sure others have, different opinions, but I mean, people are using cameras on their devices day in and day out. Students and teachers see each other all the time. So I don't think it just that the fact that the camera is taking an image of the student is in and of itself a privacy concern. But every state's laws are different. It's something that needs to be looked at. I see a hand up, but I'm going to keep going and come back to it. I want to get through everything that is right here. So the other concern would be equity, right? So every student needs a computer. The sort of dynamics and conditions are different in every state, possibly in districts. So, each test taker, each student must have a functional computer device that can be properly updated, and they must have a stable high-speed internet connection. So there's a concern for disadvantaged families. If the district doesn't already provide a device, well, where are they going to get the computer? And what if they don't have a solid high-speed internet connection? A lot of disadvantaged families, their only connection to the internet comes from their cell phone, right? So that's a concern. no ability to ensure the environment is conducive to testing. And this is a big one. I mean, this isn't just a security issue. It's also, I mean, a validity issue, right? Like you need to have a quiet, testing environment where the student has enough space to work. I mean, you could have a disadvantaged family where there could be multi-generations in the home, right? You could have, cousins living in the home. There could be a lot of people in a small amount of space, and, maybe it's bad lighting. Maybe there's a lot of noise outside. So there are a lot of, elements that are necessary to ensure an appropriate testing environment, and you have no control over that. That's a fairness concern, right? Limitations on providing needed accommodations. This is an important one. So essentially, your ability to provide testing accommodations is going to be limited by whatever can be included in the testing platform through the computer. So if a student needed an accommodation that was something that had to be provided by a human being, for example, or needed some auxiliary device, how are you going to provide that if the student is in their home? And so that is an important fairness concern. And then the last one is the limited ability to provide technical support. Certainly the proctor or the test administrator can provide guidance to students as they encounter issues. But I mean, if there's a problem and the student's operating system on their computer is updating, or there's some kind of a problem with the computer power, or maybe the headphones. I mean, there's so many technical issues that can come up, which are easily remedied in a school, because you just give the kid a new device, you give the kid a new set of headphones, you make sure the power connection works. I mean, those are the kinds of things that are very difficult to do with a student in their home. I'm going to stop for a moment, and I know there was a question, so I want to take that question before I move on.
You answered the question in your next sentence, so I'm good.
Okay, great. Next slide. So what are some strategies here that, now that I've painted this parade of horribles for you, what are some things you might do if, notwithstanding all those concerns, you still want to have a program that enables remote proctored test administrations? Well, the first thing is you really need to have clear and concise program rules, and certainly at the very minimum, a test administration manual for administering the test at home, which is going to have some significant differences from the way tests are administered in person. So we also think it's really important that you have a student and family consent and agreement. So that's partly about just ensuring that students and families understand, well, like who sees these videos, and what do they need to be able to participate in remote proctored online test administrations, what's expected of them. And we say student and family because frankly, most students are minors, right? So you got to have the parental consent. And this is not legal advice. I have to give that disclaimer. Nothing I'm saying is legal advice. So you would certainly want to speak with the attorneys for your department. But I would say we find it's really critical, not just from a legal standpoint, but just to make sure that the students and their parents or guardians understand what is involved, what's required of them, and how they have to conduct themselves during remote online proctored summative assessment administrations. Also, test administrator agreement, and I'm sure that if you have like a union for your teachers and school staff, that could be a sticky wicket, but really they have to understand, again, there are different rules for test administration. It's not the same old. It's not what you've been doing for whether it's 3 years or 30 years. And so, it's important that you get some agreement from school staff that would administer these tests remotely. And it's also critical that they get training and certification And you'd have to recognize that's going to be a different kind of training than you would provide to school staff who are administering tests in the conventional way. And then lastly, just a suggestion of equity kits. Again, if the districts don't already provide devices, you need to make sure if you're going to allow students to test in this way that they have a device that will enable them to do that. And they need to have a secure, high enough speed internet connection. And I work with another nonprofit organization that does testing across the country, and they're not affiliated with public schools in any way, but they have at-home testing, and they provide these equity kits. They have eligibility requirements. The families submit the forms, and if they meet the eligibility requirements, the organization sends out these kits to them so that they can take the test from home. Next slide. So obviously a lockdown browser that goes without saying, and there are varying degrees of locked down. And I'm not going to get deep into the technical weeds on that, but I think it is kind of a no-brainer that test takers shouldn't be able to use other applications while they're testing, copy and paste, take screenshots, like the basics of security in a browser for a testing application. It is our very strong advice that all test sessions are recorded. We understand that doesn't happen in schools, but you have people who are physically present watching testing in schools. The recording, essentially is a substitute for that and gives you the opportunity to go back and ensure that tests were administered with fidelity. So we think recording test sessions is critically important and will also enable you to meet peer review elements for monitoring test administrations, and I'll come back to that in a moment. We also recommend 2 cameras. And part of the reason may be obvious, which I've already suggested. A lot of things can be happening in the testing environment that you wouldn't have a way to see if all you're looking at is my camera that's connected to my computer. So if you require a second camera, right, the second camera can be trained on the desk and can see that I am typing responses on my keyboard, and also that I don't have notes on the desk or have other people slipping me notes. And it can also be used, a proctor can say, during the test, hey, can you please take your second camera and scan the room for me, right? If it appears that something inappropriate is happening during the test. So we recommend the second camera. As I mentioned earlier, we recommend limiting the proctor to student ratio to 1:8 for the reasons I already mentioned. You need to have some kind of technical support available, even if it's like a special number that a parent can call. You can't expect all technical support to rest with the test administrator. And alternative locations available for testing. And I know this starts to get a little bit tricky, but the reality is, like I said, particularly for disadvantaged families, testing at home is just not a good place to be testing because of the environment. What could alternative locations look like? A public library? I don't know. Thinking, again, stepping outside of the state summative assessment space, when law students were taking their bar exams during COVID and they were having problems, they were provided with hotel rooms to test. And that may seem extreme and expensive and ridiculous, but it's just one example of thinking outside the box to enable test takers to have an appropriate testing environment if they're required to test remotely in particular. Having some kind of accommodations delivery plan. Again, for example, this doesn't necessarily fit anything we've been talking about, but like a Braille test. I mean, how would you deliver a Braille test remotely? Obviously not through any of the devices, that you would deliver a conventional test, but like if you're allowing remote testing, might you have to deliver a Braille test? You might. Or for example, having a human reader. I understand most, test delivery platforms now provide the whole text-to-speech business, but there are still instances, as I understand it, where a human reader may be required for some limited number of students. Whatever the need is for an accommodation, if you're going to allow testing at home and the student requires accommodations, you need to make sure you have the ability to provide them. And lastly, I would say it's really important that you record your test sessions and have an audit program so that you have the opportunity to, at the very least, look at some percentage of these test administrations to ensure that the tests were administered with fidelity. And we do that in at least one other state, maybe 2 states that offer remote testing. And we just find things that have helped the departments of education improve what they're doing. So it would, again, enable you to meet the peer review critical element of monitoring of test administrations. So is that the last one? Okay, I'm going to back up. So, Walt, I'm going to, I guess I should stop and see if there are questions before I turn it over to Joe. So what I wanted Joe to speak about, and Joe has had
Mark.
Yeah.
Before you turn it over to Joe, can I add 2 more to this list here? I just want to call out web monitoring. I think that is a crucial thing that states can do, is consistent and continual web monitoring to look for intellectual property, namely test items, because we see in a lot of remote situations where those test items are becoming compromised and posted on the web, either students looking for answers. As they Google those questions, they now become indexed on the internet and they become out there for public consumption. So I would encourage the state to have some sort of web monitoring for internet and social media. And then also data forensics analysis, just to ensure the validity of those test scores. Data forensics can be very powerful in that area. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Walt. And absolutely, it's certainly the case that both of those are, helpful solutions to identify vulnerabilities and breaches. I would say state departments of education ought to be doing those things anyway, but there's no question that specifically on the web patrolling, that there's a heightened risk. And it elevates the importance of web patrolling. Yeah, I see a hand up. Go ahead.
Sorry there. This is Pete. I think the other thing you might add to this list, and maybe it's later in the presentation, but I think from the state side is that you have a clear and articulated policy if you find abnormalities in the testing procedures or you're going to invalidate a score. I think that needs to be broadcast very clearly, what the ramifications are for the individual student, what the ramifications are to the school or virtual school to which the score would be assigned for any accountability purposes, and what the process of checking you have all these things here, but what is the process of identifying abnormalities, and all of that needs to be laid out very, very clearly to make sure that you establish a common sense of that people trust the system, so that all the other stakeholders believe that the remote scores are as valid and accurate as are any other scores that you might use for any other purposes.
So I agree with that absolutely 100%. One of the first bullet point is probably overly broad. In the last slide or 2 slides ago was clear and concise program rules. So when I say program rules, I mean everything from soup to nuts. Including, all of the, criteria that you just mentioned and the actions that can be taken. So you're absolutely right. Corinne?
Thank you. It's Corinne Manley. I'm wondering when we hear from Joe or just go on, if we can hear if Kentucky has decided at all, who are they considering this for? I had a similar thing as with the teacher instruction time, like with the equity issues and not having the right technology. It seems like that's a moot point if we're only considering this for virtually learning students. If they don't have access to good technology, we have a big So I think we're seeing real broadly, like, considerations and success strategies and benefits and concerns. But I'm just wondering where Kentucky is. Is this, we're considering this for all students right now? Or have they decided this is only for students who learn virtually already? I just think it makes all this stuff very different.
Corinne, I'll ask any of my counterparts on here today to jump on and weigh in as well. I think right now, speaking for Kentucky, we are just maybe in what you would say those early stages of just trying to collect as much evidence as we can to see, for instance, those states that Walt shared with us at the beginning that have maybe already encountered or provided remote testing, and what kind of concerns they had, or what kind of things that we need to pay specific attention to. I shared earlier on that that we're starting to see an increase in the number of virtual schools, virtual learning academies across our state. And so I think, our biggest reason for entertaining, and further discussing the abilities around testing for remote learning is just to kind of maybe service those schools. What type of parameters would we have to have into place? How could they start their planning and preparing as we move forward for the end of year assessment, for instance, or any other type of test administrations that they're encountering throughout the year? Do we ask them, currently right now, we still ask students they have to come to a physical location, as Walt shared, a brick and mortar location now. So, that those are all things that we're currently doing. But, again, what are the things that we're going to encounter if we were to allow, say, testing at home? I'm not saying we will, but if we did allow them to test in their residence, would they have internet accessibility? Would they have what's deemed a secure, location? Could they have someone remote in and take the test for them? Those are all things that I personally hadn't thought about. So just kind of, again, we're just kind of in that early stage. We know that it's obviously continued to grow across the country, and we're starting to see more people that are looking into it. I know from prior CCSSO meetings and things, that's been a topic of conversation more than once in some of our SCAS meetings about what are states doing, or are you considering it, or why or why not, those type of things. So if anyone else would like to weigh in.
Just to clarify, I mean, it does sound like you really are considering this for virtual learners.
Yeah, well, I would say that we're right now we're just trying to see what options there is. I mean, obviously, test security is something that we definitely have to give a lot of attention to. We want to make sure that our test is secure and valid, and we're following the the integrity of the administration. And so I think right now, we're not really leaning one way or the other. We're just trying to gather all of our facts, if you will, and see if that does, move the balance one way or the other. I see Kevin Hills jumped on, so Kevin may want to share something.
Yeah, it's Kevin again. Yeah, I think that's basically where we're at. I think initially there is such a dramatic growth in virtual programs, and especially those some extremely large ones that are growing across the state, serves multiple districts across the state. So I think we've got to look at this as an option, and we know other states have legislation been put in place, so we've got to be prepared and to have a plan in place, I guess. But I think it would be initially focused on virtual only situations instructionally. So, but there's enough issues there from, just the equipment, security around regular instruction compared to, as Kevion's outlined, the issues with, taking summative assessments. So.
Okay, nobody's talking, so I will. Corinne, is your question answered now? Okay, great. So I just want to ask Joe to address, because Joe has really had the closest proximity to implementation and operation of a remote proctored online test administration program for another state. And I think he can best speak to the experiences of that state and his observations, because I talked about everything you want to consider if you're possibly going to develop a program like this. And what Joe's going to talk about is sort of the lived experience. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Thanks, Mark. So I think suffice it to say that this list of, recommendations that, we've put in front of you came from that learning experience, to be quite honest, right? So when the state reached out to us, they said, well, we have this situation in Corinne. To be direct, yes, it was students who were testing remotely, and it was right in the heart of coming off the heels of the pandemic, and parents, even though the kids were in school, whether it was a part-time virtual situation or not, they were still uncomfortable having the kids come to school to take the test. That was the requirement. That was the requirement, for even for students who were learning remotely, even though there was in school learning, there were plenty of parents who opted to remain in a remote learning environment. And many states, I think most states, were requiring students to come into the campus to test. But there, as you can imagine, was some pushback on that, more so from a safety standpoint than anything else. One of the states where we primarily worked with, there were some students who left the area in which the school was and lived remotely. So there was no way for them to even come to campus easily. So we had to sit down with them and talk about the different options that they had. And what this state did is they put together a priority level. So if a school wants to administer a remote test, there is a priority process that they had to go through. That was issue number one. But the biggest piece, and I think, Mark touched on it, it's the top bullet in, I think, 2 slides back. And then Pete brought it up again a few minutes ago, is those agreements, those processes and procedures. That was absolutely critical in being able to successfully launch a remote administration environment that is secure. the biggest thing to keep in mind, and it's been said multiple times, is the security of your test content, right? So obviously there's equity and things like that you have to consider, but at the end of the day, the security of your test content and the environment is key. So knowing that a virtual environment is impossible to be equitable to an in-classroom setting. It just is. That's the reality of the situation. There's no, let's just be blunt about it, be forward about it, and understand that. You cannot create a remote environment that is similar to an in-person testing environment. So the biggest piece was really diving into process and procedures, being very clear as to what the requirements are to qualify for remote testing, and understanding that everybody, each stakeholder, understands what test security means in that remote environment. It's really no different, obviously, than in an in-classroom setting, but the largest piece is the parents, right, or the adults that are at home. They need to know and understand what a secure test environment means. They are now essentially proctors, right? So you have your test administrators in a live setting. You've got a large classroom. You've got test administrators. You've got other staff who are trained that are in the classroom to assist with testing. In a remote environment, you've got the test administrator on the screen. And imagine if we were doing a test session right now and I were the test administrator, I'm trying to keep my eye on the 9 cameras that I see on the screen. I can't, right? So the parents become proctors in that environment. They also become technology support, right?
Hey, Joe, you're on mute.
Don't know how that happened. My apologies. So the student and family consent and agreements, those were huge. Those were critical. And that actually, there were student agreements that had to be signed by the test administrators who are administering the test to make sure they adhered to the ratio that the state required. There were requirements that were put in place well in advance. Every student, every household had to have a second device so that they could record the test session. The lockdown browser that they are using didn't have a camera, doesn't have a camera system involved. That vendor didn't provide recording functionality. So the state implemented a second device rule where the device was positioned in a way where it can be used to scan the room, as Mark described, and then was placed in a way where it could see the student's workspace. So their hands, the keyboard, the mouse, so they could observe that. The test session had to be recorded via Zoom or some other, Teams or something. And then that test session had to be uploaded for review. And this is critical because in that situation, many, those recorded sessions ended up leading to the state having to take action, and invalidate entire administrations based on actions that occurred during the test sessions, both by students and by test administrators. So that's where, if you, on the next slide where we listed the very last bullet was recorded test session audits. Just like you could sample, you have people in the classrooms walking around observing the administration of tests in a live environment, in the recorded test session environment, or the remote test session environment. Having an audit program that allows you to review a percentage of those items, a percentage of those test sessions for review is critical. For this particular client, they have told all their test administrators who are going to administer the test that their test session will likely be audited. They just tell them that it can be, it will be audited. And it is a requirement that prior to administering the test, that the Zoom information is sent to the state so the state understands if they want to, they can join the Zoom session themselves and as a state employee observe the live administration. But all recordings are then submitted through an audit process where those videos are reviewed by a third party. So they're not reviewed by the state, they're not reviewed by the schools. They are reviewed by a third party. and that third party will actually sit there and watch the entire 2-hour session, documenting anything that is, observed, and then that is brought back forth to the state. And then from there, the state has taken action in that regard and invalidated entire sessions. But all that to say, the reason why that is successful is the planning up ahead. The conversations and the discussion, it was probably a good year's worth of back and forth planning, communication, not just with us as their vendors, their support, but with their community. There were legal things that had to be discussed with the legal department. There was communication to the public that needed to occur. I'm going to stop there. See if there's any other questions. Hopefully I gave you an overrun and short on time, so I don't want to ramble on too long, but want to give you all an opportunity to ask any additional questions. Yes, Pete.
Thank you. So two very, very different questions. One is a comment to piggyback on my own comment in terms of the policy and the rules and all of that, which you all addressed again. But I think one point I was trying to make with that is that it's very clear to the stakeholders who are not engaged in remote testing, so that everyone across the board is comfortable with those results. Of course, the ones who are engaged in testing will be very familiar with all of the rules and the safeguards. It's the people who are not engaged who you have to convince that you're getting valid and accurate results. So that was, I guess, just a point. The second thing is actually more of a question, and I'm curious whether anyone, or whether you all or the states you've worked with have thought about the specific items that are used for remote testing. And I know given computer adaptive testing, it's a little trickier, but whether there's concerns about release items then having issues being in the item bank, or whether there's a plan, for example, let's say in Kentucky, they need to release items anyway, and so maybe their algorithm for the assessment draws more heavily on items that they intend to release, so it doesn't compromise the item bank moving forward. So I don't know if there's those are just thoughts off the top of my head, whether there's any been thinking in terms of specifically items within the item bank and how to safeguard those into the future.
I think this is probably, so from a Cavion standpoint, what I would say is that's very clearly a psychometric and a conversation with the psychometrician group. But I will say that a lot of the states are part of a consortium, so there is obvious concern in the release of those items. In computer adaptive testing, it's less of an issue, but still a concern. The thing that I would point out is that you want to be careful that you're not releasing a different set of item banks that might have a different level of equality, for lack of a better term there, for remote tested students as opposed to those who are testing in person, right? Because now you don't have equity. So having two different item banks is a dangerous thing unless there's some level of item equating that has occurred between those two sets of items. That's the extent of my psychometric ability. I'll just stop there and see if someone from the state has a different perspective.
Joe, I appreciate that, and I think that we would follow the same lines. I think anytime you think about the releasing of items, obviously that's something that could have a lot more weight and bearing once those items have been, potentially made out there in the public. So, those are all facets of thoughts and conversations around that, but obviously we've not really dealt with that to that degree here.
And Pete, to piggyback on that, I'm looking back in the book here that we wrote on this topic. In chapter 3 talks about some more elements that can be incorporated, and we hit on that in that chapter where we talk about more secure item design features or complex and technology enhanced item types that are going to be delivered remotely, possibly more secure exam designs. You mentioned CAT, multi-stage adaptive, linear on the fly, forward only present item presentation, things like that, rapid repair and republication of items. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can discuss, given more time to look at this topic for sure, the department. Mark, I know you've got to get to another meeting soon. Do we want to push through real quick to see if there's any other questions from the Kentucky TAC?
Corinne has her hand up, so.
Okay.
I'll just say these then, but you can consider timing what's important. You had said that Massachusetts went back to no remote and is a strong advocate. I don't know if you know, like, what was their position, what happened, or I would recommend that KDE look into what happened, because at a minimum, then you can learn from that, right? If you decide to go this route.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kevin, if you can reach out to me offline, I can give you the name and contact number for someone in the Massachusetts Department of Ed that would be happy to talk about this. They have spoken publicly about it at a conference on test security and other conferences that I've been to. So I'm happy to share that with the department.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, you know, obviously I can't speak on behalf of Massachusetts, but we have, you know, have been in conferences where they have, I think just their overall practice, their experience, and not just Massachusetts, I've heard of other states as well, but they did not have a good experience with it, you know, just based around, you know, the liabilities. I think Corinne was one of the biggest things that they really pointed out. You know, there was too many risks, too many liabilities. They weren't confident in the results that they got. I mean, just for the most part, that's kind of what I heard, you know, just summarizing it off the cuff, that, you know, they were not confident in those results, not enough to administer them a second time.
Yeah, the only other thing I would throw out too is this, for all the tests given, like for the juniors given the ACT and stuff, it seems like you might want to consider separately different tests and grade levels for the, you know, ramifications for the student or whatever it may be. That's it.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
Maybe let's make your comment or question the last one, and we'll wrap up, and appreciate the Cavion folks sharing their expertise with us.
Absolutely.
You had mentioned comparability, and I think you were talking a little bit about setting, but I'm thinking more about the score comparability from remote and brick and mortar testing. Have you recommended to states studies to determine whether the scores are comparable? Or has anybody done anything looking at score comparability in those two very different settings?
Yeah, that's completely outside the realm of Cavion's business model, but we would encourage states to do comparability studies. Absolutely. That seems to be best practice, and we would encourage that.
But you don't know of anyone who has, I guess is the question.
No, I don't personally know anyone that has conducted one.
Thank you, everyone. We provided the 5 minutes that at the end that we took from Cavion at the beginning, and so we will go to a break now. If I think we'll be okay if it was scheduled to be 20 minutes. So if we come back at 10 after, then we'll start up with our next agenda item, which is talking about the Kentucky United We Learn Council. Thank you. Welcome back to the meeting of the Kentucky Technical Advisory Committee. We're glad for our last major agenda item today that we have Karen Dodd with us to lead us through the presentation and discussion about Kentucky's innovative work with the Kentucky United We Learn Council. Karen, if you could, I think you were at the, heard the TAC member introductions at the beginning, but perhaps you could introduce yourself.
Absolutely. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Dodd. I'm the Chief Performance Officer here at the department. That means I'm in charge of strategic planning and research or data analysis as it relates to any of our strategic initiatives. I also get asked to lead some of our major initiatives as they come into the department, and United We Learn is one of those right now. So I'm really pleased to be able to share the work. I think we're doing some really exciting things, and communicating it out, especially around this United We Learn effort, is really important. It's a key thing that we're trying to do right now. So thanks for having me here to share this with you. So what advice do you have as the Cool Council explores the design of an accountability indicator in which local districts and schools can provide evidence of deeper learning? This is a question that we typically ask of the advisory groups that we attend when we are giving this presentation. So if you can just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we go through. And I will say that this presentation was put together after our most recent convening, which was in early November. So while it's still very relevant, I'm going to be filling in some things that have happened between now and then so that I am sure that you're updated. And I think we still have Jennifer on the phone. Jennifer is very involved in the council. So Jennifer, since I don't have Penny here with me today, if there's anything that I fall short on, please feel free to jump in and add to the conversation. And if there's any questions that I can't answer, Jennifer probably can. So we started the council with about 65 members, which is a lot of people. And as you can imagine, there are times that people join with all of the best intents, but then life happens and they have to fall off. So we have had that happen. We've also had people that heard about what we're doing and asked if they can join. So there's been a lot of churn in membership over the past year. And as of right now, we have about 50 members. Audrey Gilbert is a recent graduate from Frankfurt. She is our chair, and Penny Christian is our vice chair and chair-elect. So come April, she will move into the chair position and we'll be electing a new vice chair. We still have we have three standing committees, which you can see on the screen there: Vibrant Learning Experiences, Accelerating Innovation, and Building a Bold New Future with Communities. One of the things that we were trying out at the November convening was to move into work groups. So instead of these three standing committees, can we break the work into smaller groups and have people get more involved that way? Because we were really seeing some engagement starting to fall off. So we're still trying, this is a 4-year project. And so we're trying to really get the engagement and get people interested in working on the things that are of interest to them, as opposed to putting them in a committee where they may meet monthly, but there may not be a lot of meat around that meeting. You know, they may not need to meet, but a standing committee means that you are going to meet on a regular basis. So by working in work groups during this session, we got a lot of really good feedback that our members really enjoyed that. And we're thinking that by moving into that kind of a structure, they can join something and not feel like they have to attend or be a part of this for a full 4 years. Maybe they want to be in a work group that just has a short task. They can be a part of that task and then move on or move to another work group. So that's something we're trying to restructure right now. So our agenda for the 2 days, we started off with committee share outs. So each of those 3 committees shared with the rest of the group what they had been working on for the past 6 months. Then we finalized, or we worked on our moonshot. The idea was to finalize it, and our moonshot is what we're calling the vision statement for the council. So I do have a draft of that I can share with you, and we're hoping to vote on that next week to make it final. We did some journey mapping. I don't know if any of you have ever been involved in journey mapping, but basically it is a timeline of what we've done from the beginning of the effort to where we are now. A lot of times you'll see this like in a project, and I'm a project manager, so we'll do it as part of a post-mortem after a project. But we decided to do it 1 year in, and you put in a timeline with what are the events or milestones, things that happened over the past year. And then you ask people to reflect on those things and where did they feel most engaged. So we kind of have like a little scale, and they can say, I'm highly engaged for this part, not so engaged in this part. And that really helped us to determine how or where people are feeling engaged, and maybe how we can change how we're working with them. So that was a very insightful activity that we did on day one. And then we gave them some committee time to go back and work on some things that they knew that they needed to work on as a committee. Then on day 2, we moved into those working groups, and the working groups were partly determined by that mapping process that we did on day 1. There were some things that we knew we needed to work on, and some things that came up as a result of that activity. So throughout the morning, everyone was in a working group doing some very specific work. After lunch, we had a 1-year celebration, and just really wanted people to have a little bit of downtime, talk to one another, do a little bit of networking. But we also asked them to click on a URL. That's not what it's called. What's it called? One of those squiggly square things, you know what I'm talking about. And in it, you open it up to an app, and you can just fill in words. So we asked them, think about what are some words that come to mind as you think about how we've worked together over the past year. And I've got a picture in here that I'll share with you in a minute of what that ended up looking like. And then finally, we had some panelists come and offer their reflections as we shared out about the work of these working groups. So here's the word cloud that we put together during that celebration. And you can see things on there like collaboration, local accountability, L3 districts, vision, relationships, clarity, momentum. These are kind of the things that rose to the top, coalitions. So that was just kind of a fun little thing that we did while they were doing a little bit of networking. So here's the moonshot. This is, again, still in draft. And like I said, we hope to finalize this next week. But the vision for this council is to build a prosperous Kentucky. We will launch an accountability system that is meaningful and useful to all our learners. We also had a working group that drafted a definition for what we mean by vibrant learning experiences. So this is what they came up with. And again, this will be voted on hopefully next week to finalize it. Learning that matters to students. So in partnership with families and communities, students are agents of their own learning, engaged in relevant, authentic, and joyful learning opportunities. Vibrant learning honors students' cultural wealth, gifts, and interests. Vibrant learning culminates in the application of knowledge and skills demonstrated through personalized products. So we had other working groups that met during this time. One was a portrait of a learner, and what I just read is what they were working on, that definition. So they also talked about what is, I'm sorry, no, it's not. Portrait of a learner is something different. They talked about what is the Kentucky United We Learn Council's role in supporting the implementation of Portrait of a Learner. So our board, I think it was just over the summer, they finalized the state Portrait of a Learner. And one of the things that the chair and vice chair of our board asked is for the department to make sure that that gets implemented. So the council is kind of wrestling with that. What does that mean to implement a portrait of a learner. And so as we think about a system of systems, those portraits of a learner may be part of that system at the local level. And so that's kind of what they're wrestling with and will continue to wrestle with as that group continues to meet. We had another group that was called Engaging Communities. They wrestled with how do we ensure diverse representation, which is critical to identifying strategies that serve all students well. And this is just something, you know, even as a council, like I said, we've got 65 members and we've really tried to bring in the diversity of our stakeholder groups. So thinking about students, educators, family, community, business leaders, that's kind of, you know, all the folks that we're looking to bring together and help us come up with what this system of systems should look like. How do we know that we're truly serving students in the very best way? But we also know that it's not just up to these council members. It's not up to 65 or 55 people to make that determination. And we also learned that our students have a hard time coming to these meetings. Imagine that. It's, you know, here we are having a 2-day meeting and people are asking, where are all the students? Well, I can't in good faith keep asking students to come to 2-day meetings when we have an issue with chronic absenteeism in Kentucky. So, you know, that's another thing we really need to think about. What are other ways that we can engage stakeholders, engage community members and business leaders outside of the council? We don't think it's really fair that you have to be a part of this group in order to have a say. So this group is going to continue working on what are some other avenues where we get others involved in this work. Accelerating Innovation, or the System of Systems, is another group that met. I think Jennifer was in on this one. Their question was, how do we create an accountability system that includes local innovations through a menu of options, honoring students, streamline state testing, local adaptability, support vibrant learning, and encourage collaboration. And that really is the work of the council. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to create. So that is, of course, ongoing work. And then we had a group that met to do our council charter. I was part of that group. And ours was, you know, what protocols do we establish for the council that outlines roles, processes, and procedures while keeping member engagement at the forefront? So here again, you know, a lot of this is just process and procedure stuff, like how do we vote? One of the things that we decided was, well, we already knew that everything had to be in open meetings, just like we are right now. The council also has to have public meetings, so everything is recorded. Now then, when we get into these work groups and we're just kind of working through, those weren't recorded. So you wouldn't see the session where we're actually just putting together a charter. But within that charter, we had to define how that is supposed to work when we are meeting to make some decisions. So that is again, ongoing work. Just because of some of the things that came out of the work on those 2 days, it made us think that we need to make some more edits to that. So that is also still in draft. I don't know that we're going to have that ready for voting next week, but we're getting close on that one. And then, as I mentioned, we did have some panelists there. We were really looking for decision makers in other areas to come and listen to what these work groups were working on and to just give us some feedback on what they hear about the work. And so I'm going to go over to my other screen over here so I can see that better. Okay, so we had Representative James Tipton there, and Representative Tipton is actually a member of the Cool Council. His comment, one of his comments to us, was to take the time to develop those relationships and inform the policymakers and inform people in your community, because that is going to be essential to coming up with a product that we, the state legislators, can work with. We also had John Ballard there, who is the Senate Majority Leadership staff, and his was a similar comment, having That communication, especially at your local level with your legislators, is critical to any of these journeys. There are a lot of districts across the state that are craving to do work like this and just need a little push or a little help. I would encourage you to have the outreach across the state and to be the entity that folks can go to help. We asked the Council on Post-Secondary Education to send a representative, and so Dr. Amanda Ellis came and joined us for that. And again, you see the same theme around communication with her comment, the importance of communication and clarity and to know what you're asking for. I say the same thing about the workforce and different industries. They have their own language and their own views, and so if we're not clear on how it fits into Kentucky's economy for prosperity, then you're not going to have the buy-in. We also invited members from across our co-ops, and quite a few of them were there. We're only quoting one. So Amanda Burrows was there. She's with the Central Kentucky Educational Co-op. And her comment was that I think you are honoring unique student experiences. Every district is different and every school is different. So please keep that in mind as you do this work. But using those design principles, which were established by the Accelerating Innovation Committee, as what our universal piece is to help continue to honor the differences and uniquenesses of the districts is where the work needs to continue to go. So again, you know, that the fact that we have a work group really focusing on community engagement, I think is going to help us address all of the comments that we heard from those panelists. So if you are looking for more information, we have plenty out on our webpage. If you go to the KDE page in the upper right-hand corner, you can just click on United We Learn, and it'll take you directly to the United We Learn effort. And then over on the right-hand side, the very first link is for the council. And once you get to that page, you can see the 3 committees in there. We have all of their agendas, all of their minutes, all of the recordings from all of the meetings. We also have newsletters that we send out on a monthly basis. So if you're looking for any of that, if you want to get more involved, let me know. Like I said, we're always looking for more members. And if you have any suggestions on how we can engage more people, we're happy to listen to that too, because like I said, that's a huge effort for us right now. Our next steps are that those working groups are going to continue to meet. Like I said, we're actually restructuring so that we can have that better engagement with those smaller groups. And well, the leadership team has already analyzed the responses. And then finally, our next convening is going to be in April, and that will be in Frankfurt. And again, that will be an open meeting, so it will be broadcast live if you're interested in listening in on that. And with that, any questions? I'm happy to try to answer. Pete.
Thank you. I guess one question I have has to do with what this council's role might be in hiring the new commissioner, if any.
They really don't have a role in hiring the commissioner. That's up to the board has hired an agency that is responsible for doing the hiring. They will bring candidates to the Board of Education. Ultimately, it's up to the board to put forth their final candidate, and then we do have to have legislative approval, which is a new process that was just put into place this year.
Yeah, I guess that. I mean, that sort. I didn't mean to imply that you had a role in kind of that element. I was thinking more in terms of weighing in terms of providing any kind of support in terms of, I don't know, potentially also being a partner in interviewing or something like that.
No, they really don't have any kind of role. I will say that members of the board have gone to all of our advisory groups and talked with the council on what they are looking for in the next commissioner. So that was a pretty wide effort by the board. And so obviously the opinions of those members were taken into consideration. But I wouldn't say they hold any more weight than anybody else. However, from just about every advisory group that they met with, what we did hear is that people want the United We Learn work to continue. They want to make sure that we have a commissioner that's going to continue this work. So at least we know that what we're doing is getting out there. People are hearing about it because they're saying they want it to continue.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think, one of your questions was how do you get people more involved and get additional members? One of the ways, obviously, is that this is a very big and tangible endeavor that people could see that all their voices are being heard. So that's kind of, however that gets done. I just think it's an opportunity to make this more concrete for potential participants.
Yeah, absolutely.
Karen, I will note our KTAC members may be interested in the fact that Kentucky did receive a CGSA grant. Kentucky applied for a competitive grant on state assessments and was successful in that proposal. We received $3 million, or just slightly above $3 million for 4 years. So when Karen references the year one, that's the year one of the grant. So we've got 3 more years of that CGSA grant.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, for that clarification. Yeah, Phoebe.
Yeah, what have you, in terms of, sorry, I know this is a big thing you guys are doing, and it's pretty amazing. And to focus in on assessment, it's hard for me to narrow myself back down. But what kinds of things are you thinking about in making the assessment and accountability system more appropriate for this new vision? And I'd be curious as to know how the CGA grant fits into it, but I don't need to know. But it's more, what's your vision on assessment, or is there any in terms of implementation, or is it only in terms of outcomes, I guess?
Go ahead, Jennifer.
I thought you may want me to take that one. So Phoebe, I think that, as Karen mentioned, the Kentucky Board of Education adopted a portrait of a learner. And with that, they want more engaging, more rich and activities for our students that will engage them in different ways, in deeper learning, and then therefore have better student success. And success in many different ways. We're facing chronic absenteeism here in Kentucky and across the state. We are losing students to other options for education. And so, and as Kevin Hill mentioned earlier, the state assessment results are not where we would want them to be. We would want to see them increased. So, there's all types of successes that we're looking toward for our students.
Just to follow up. Oh, I'm
yes.
sorry.
So with that portrait of a graduate, they're looking at these very rich types of experiences. So that's one of the things that we're learning right now in this our exploration and learning phase, that we're looking at different types of demonstrations of that those essential skills that are identified in a portrait of a learner. Things that have resonated with people would include defenses of learning, different projects such as a backpack of skills, things of that nature that we could look at, that students would have some type of student agency in developing their project and deeper engagement in. So those are the types of, when Karen mentions the menu, we're looking at different types of opportunities for students to demonstrate their learning.
Thanks. That is helpful. It gets it more concrete for me. And I was so based on that, it sounds like, I don't know if you've had a chance to create a logic model or a theory of action that starts, I have been involved in these kinds of reinventions over the years. Most state departments go through, perhaps not one quite this big, but of little things. And sometimes where we find we have a weakness is in tying the ideals to the actual concrete actions and goals, even if you're not there yet, but even. So I was just wondering if you've had a chance to put together a theory of action or some kind of logic progressive model or anything for this yet.
Those are our next stages. What we've really tried to do is look at design principles and come to an understanding of what our stakeholders are what they hold most valuable to them, and the fact that they want to see students have voice. They want to center on students that may be marginalized. They want those vibrant learning experience, and we have developed the 12. There's actually 12 design principles that we're looking at and valuing from our members. So we're in this process right now, and the theory of action is not concrete, but that's a very good suggestion.
And that's great, because the design principles then can start leading you into then what it looks like, and then show you things that, oh, that's not going to work, that kind of fun stuff. Thank you.
Right, I think we have Suzanne next.
Thank you. This is Suzanne Lane. I was looking at the definition of vibrant learning experiences, and you've been talking about this within the last 5 minutes. Is that vibrant learning honors students' cultural wealth, gifts, and interests? So I'm thinking of how this is going to transfer to the assessment of students in terms of honoring their culture, their communities, their experiences. I know a lot of states are beginning to think about how to better assess students. And for example, in science, it might be having phenomena on the test that is relevant to the experiences that different groups have. And NAEP is trying to do this within their science assessment framework. So just being a little more responsive to the assets and interests and experiences of different cultural, ethnic, as well as locational groups.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I think we have the what in place. That the how is definitely something we're working on.
And Karen mentioned the membership of the council as well, and it was very strategic and thoughtful on the membership and the makeup of the membership, because we wanted to have people that generally don't have a seat at the table or don't have their voices heard to be part of this process. So it was, to paraphrase, radically inclusive. I think that was a term that was used. when we were developing the membership of the council. So we're trying to generate it from that perspective and bringing lots of people in with different types of experiences.
And you mentioned that you have design principles, and so I really like that idea, and I'd love to see them at some time. And also thinking about what are your design principles in assessment to ensure that you have items that are responsive to different cultural and ethnic groups and locational groups, because I know you have very rural areas within Kentucky, and their experiences are going to be very different than the suburbs of Lexington.
That's right. And we generally think of rural Kentucky as being in our eastern part of the state where the mountains are and in Appalachia. But actually our western Kentucky counties are quite rural as well. So it's a prominent rurality is a majority of the state in Kentucky. And we've got the document of the design principles separate, and I'll see if I can't download those for you and have go through Brian or Kevin O'Hare to share those design principles with you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands raised. So thank you for the questions. Really appreciate the engagement today. That's all I have. So I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Brian.
Karen and Jennifer, thanks. I did have a question because it was, I think the term was used about system of systems. And I think that's a distinguishing characteristic when people talk about an accountability system, the next generation in Kentucky. I think they're imagining something maybe quite different. And I know that people haven't put all the flesh on the bones, but maybe you could talk about maybe what some people are thinking about when they talk about a system of systems.
Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Karen. So we have talked about the system of systems within the particular state indicator. And basically, it's the state would set the parameters of whether it's an indicator or something within the accountability system that then the local districts would then meet those requirements, given the autonomy to make local decisions on what makes sense in their school district and their community. I'll give you an example that I use with when describing the system of systems is that we have something similar to that currently with our graduation requirements. The Kentucky Board of Education sets those minimum graduation requirements, and the students have to have so many credits in English and so many credits in math and science, social studies, and so forth. But then each of our local districts then have their own responsibility to see that their students meet those requirements, and then they can add to those requirements as well. So a system that the state would set the minimum requirements of, and then the local districts then would have the decision making to set their system for their students. So a system of local systems. And so we're thinking that, this through this menu of options, we would set the parameters of the system for this local accountability piece. And through that menu of options, then the schools would then meet and determine their local priorities in order to meet those requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Phoebe?
Yeah, I like that systems a lot. But then something hit me and I went, oh no. I know I know this won't be the way you guys go, but it might need to be explicit for people like me. And I remember in the beginning of the standards movement, we talked about how there are going to be standards and local control on how to teach them. And that's all we need. Once they know what the standards are and once they have their own, they make their own decisions about what they're going to teach, everything's going to all fall together. Not fall, really get put, you know what I mean, not in a bad way. And we learned that didn't work, that there needed to be a lot of supports in place in order for people to make good choices about how to teach the standards and how to interact with different kinds of students and all sorts of things, which looking back we probably also all go like, why didn't we think of that to begin with? So I'm wondering what kind of, I'm sure you haven't gotten there yet, but maybe what you're considering in terms of supports to help districts set up good systems.
So that's the conversation that we had with one of the other standing committees on Tuesday evening, is that districts come into the situation at various different levels. So they're going to have to need supports that are different. So a district, we have what's called local labs of learning. I mentioned that earlier this morning, in that they there's some of those districts that are far down the road on their local accountability and their measures of success in implementing defenses of learning and backpack of skills and those types of richer types of demonstrations. There are other districts that are just starting, some that are just not even considering it yet. So there's a myriad of different levels for each of our districts. So part of the CGSA deliverables are those supports and putting together those types of policies and support structures for our local districts given where they are. So that's part of the work of the final 3 years.
Thank you.
All right, Brian, I think it's yours.
All right, thank you. Karen, we appreciate your giving this update on the exciting work going on, and look forward to hearing more about it as you go forward. In I know that the grant is not the only way. The grant has a lifetime, but I think the Kentucky United We Learn preceded the grant, and I think it probably is intended to last longer than the grant as well.
Yes, I think you're right. All right. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. We are well ahead of our schedule, so I think the next agenda item we have is setting future meetings for the TAC. Kevin, are we okay with ending early if we get to the end of our agenda?
I don't think anyone will argue with that, Brian. So our TAC members have been on, and we've got a full day tomorrow as well. So I think we're perfectly okay with making those selections and then calling it a day.
Okay, great. The TAC members, we had three meeting general dates, and then we had 2 options for each one. They are March 20 or 26, so in a couple of months. That would be a virtual meeting. We're asking people to hold a similar time schedule as we've done for these, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern. You can see that we'll shorten it if when we get the specific agenda set up. Maybe we can go through the individual dates before and just see if there's any consensus about those dates. March 20th or 26th. Well,
Sorry,
Phoebe,
I can't do. Oh, I can't do the 20th. 20th.
Cannot do 20, but
Right.
can do 26. How many of the TAC members can do March 26?
I'm sorry, I can't do either day.
Oh, cannot do either day. Okay.
I can't do either date either.
Okay, so those dates are not good dates. So we in March we would have to look for something other than those 2 days. Okay, let's go on to. So I think what we'll, in terms of efficiency, I think it might be easier for us to do a poll outside for those. But while we're here, June 12 or 13 or 19 and 20th, that would be in person in location in Kentucky to be determined. June 12 or 13, 19 and 20.
12 and 13 is fine with me. The other is not good.
Same for me.
Phoebe?
Sorry, I hit my calendar so many times it started just going too fast. It was June 12 and 13, and yeah, 12 and 13 works for me. The other one was what? Oh, it doesn't matter.
19, 20, but it doesn't matter because a couple of the folks can only do the 12th and 13th. Pete, does that work for you?
12 and 13 is good. Yes, thank you.
Okay, and Elena said that 12 and 13 works for her. So let's lock down June 12 and 13 in person, and we'll find out where the actual meeting will be. Those of you who are familiar with Kentucky know that there are 2 major airports, one in Louisville, one in just outside of Cincinnati, that are make it easy to fly into. The last one would be October 9 or October 16.
And I don't have a dog in that fight. I'll be gone by then. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Phoebe is serious about retiring.
Yes.
Phoebe, no.
I was going to say good for you.
Unfortunately, I can't do either of those dates.
Okay.
So Phoebe, we need you.
Bryn or Pete, are either of those dates possibility?
They're both fine for me. Oh, sorry.
Same as Pete. Fine for me on both of the October.
Okay, so if Suzanne, we'll have to see if we can get another date, but at least we know where people stand currently on that one. And Elena said only the 16th would work for her. The 9th would not work for her. So I think we'll try to find another date that everyone can meet in March and October, and we'll do that by having a poll instead of trying to do it now. Okay, I may send that out to people just this afternoon and see if we can try to wrap something up by tomorrow. Kevin, I think we've covered everything in our agenda, and we can end early. We're so efficient.
All right. Well, thanks to everyone today for joining. I know that these meetings coming together, we do appreciate the opportunity for you guys to be with us. I am glad that, always happy to see you all, and can't wait to see you in June, as we'll send Phoebe off on her farewell tour before she decides that she's going to stay in. Actually, Phoebe shared this with me back in September when we were in Washington, D.C., that she thought that she had some grandchildren that required her time a whole lot more than the work, and kudos to her for that, and a successful career. And I know her next one's going to be even more rewarding. So special thanks to Phoebe for that. I think we've done all we can do today. We'll meet back here tomorrow again, same time at 11 o'clock Eastern time, and hopefully it'll be warm online. and I just appreciate all of you and the opportunity to be with you today.
All right, thank you, everyone. We'll adjourn and meet back tomorrow at 11 Eastern. If TAC members could log on it as you did today, it's a little bit early, so we can just start promptly, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right, see you tomorrow.